My brother laughed when I bought Grandma's old farm, then he learned what was buried under it. The first time I saw the place, I thought my brother might be right. The farmhouse had been in our family for 4 generations, but by the time Grandma passed, it was more skeleton than home. The roof sagged like an old man's shoulders, the porch was a graveyard of rotting boards, and the paint had peeled off so completely that the bare wood had gone the color of a dirty penny. The land itself, 120 acres of what used to be prime farmland, was a tangle of weeds and young pines that had taken over the fields like squatters. My brother, Mark, 2 years older and never short on opinions, had laughed right in my face when I told him I was buying it. "Dude," he said, leaning back in his chair at our parents' kitchen table, a beer in his hand and a smirk on his face that I'd known my whole life. "That place is a money pit. A liability. The well is probably poisoned, the foundation is cracked, and I'm pretty sure the barn is held up by nothing but spite and a family of raccoons. What are you gonna do? Move out there and become a goat farmer?" I just shrugged. It was Grandma's. It was our summer place. I have good memories there. "Memories don't pay property taxes," Mark countered. He looked over at our mom, hoping for backup. "Right, Mom? Tell him he's being an idiot." Mom just gave her standard non-committal head tilt. "It's your money, honey." Mark had laughed again, a short, dismissive bark, and that was that. He was a real estate agent in the city, a slick guy with a tailored suit and a BMW he leased. He saw the world in terms of ROI and resale value. The old farm was a broken asset, and in his mind, he'd already decided that I was just a sentimental fool. I am a structural engineer, but my work is mostly on commercial buildings downtown. The farm was my escape, my weekend project. I put in a lowball offer, expecting a counter. But the executor of the estate, a distant cousin who was just as eager to get rid of it as Grandma, had been reluctant to leave, accepted it immediately. I officially became the owner of 120 acres of weeds, a house that should have been condemned, and a mountain of debt on a Friday afternoon. For the first few months, I felt the weight of Mark's laughter every time I swung a sledgehammer. He had a point. It was a financial black hole. I replaced the roof myself, which took 3 weeks and left me with a permanent sunburn and a newfound respect for roofers. I rewired the kitchen, which nearly electrocuted me twice. I had to dig a new septic line, which was exactly as terrible and dirty as it sounds. Every weekend was a new nightmare of plumbing, drywall, or the constant, insidious smell of mildew. But I loved it. I loved the quiet. I loved the way the floorboards creaked in a language only I was beginning to understand. The house had a soul, even if it was a grumpy, dusty one. Then I started on the basement. It wasn't like a modern basement. It was a dirt floor, stone-walled cellar, probably dug out by my great-grandfather in the 1920s. It was cool and damp and smelled of earth and old potatoes. The only light was a single bare bulb on a pull chain that flickered if you jostled it. My goal was to pour a concrete slab and maybe put in a proper support system for the sagging floor. Joists above, that meant I had to dig. I brought down a shovel and a pickaxe on a Saturday morning. The dirt was hard-packed, a dark, loamy soil that turned to a heavier clay-like subsoil about a foot down. I worked for an hour, a slow, monotonous rhythm of shovel, strain, dump, repeat. My body was getting used to this kind of work, the honest burn in my shoulders and back. It was around 11 in the morning when my shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. The sound was wrong, a dull, metallic clunk. I assumed it was a rock, common enough. I knelt down, brushing the dirt away, but what I found wasn't a rock. It was the edge of something metal, a flat, rusted surface. My mind raced through the possibilities. An old stove, a boiler, maybe a treasure chest full of gold doubloons from a pirate ancestor. I grabbed the pickaxe and started chipping away around it, my curiosity piqued. It was large, maybe 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. After 20 minutes of grunting and scraping, I had uncovered a thick, old-fashioned iron lockbox. It was heavy, probably 60 or 70 pounds. The lock was rusted solid, a big, ornate keyhole that hadn't seen a key in half a century. I couldn't get it open, and I felt a chill of excitement mixed with a little bit of dread. I lugged it up the creaky stairs and set it on the kitchen table. The only piece of furniture I had besides a sleeping bag and a camping stove. I stared at it for a long time, my mind running wild. I should have called Mark. I should have sent him a picture and said, "Hey, look what I found." But I remembered his laugh. I remembered the sneer. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of wondering if I had found something valuable, nor the ammunition to laugh again if it turned out to be filled with old nails and an 1842 copy of Godey's Lady's Book. Instead, I called my friend, Eric. Eric is a locksmith. He's a good guy, a bit of a metalhead with a long beard and a quiet demeanor. And he owes me a favor from when I fixed a structural issue in his shop's building. He drove out the next afternoon with his tools, a skeptical look on his face. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, running a finger over the rusted surface. "Basement," I said, "buried under the dirt floor. My grandma's house." He didn't ask any more questions. He just got to work. The lock was old, but Eric is a master of his craft. He used a combination of WD-40, a thin pick, and a surprising amount of force. It took him almost an hour. The silence in the house broken only by his muttered curses and the scraping of metal. Finally, there was a loud, satisfying click. He looked at me and grinned. "You want the honors?" I took a deep breath and lifted the heavy lid. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, nestled in a bed of red, rotting velvet that smelled of mothballs and thyme, were neat stacks of paper. The top one was a deed, dated 1952. I moved it aside. Below it were more documents, contracts, letters tied with faded ribbon. And under all of it, a dozen thick, cloth-bound ledger books. The first ledger I pulled out was filled with tight, spidery handwriting. It was dated 1947. The name on the inside cover was my great-grandfather, Willie Thompson. "What is it?" Eric asked, his curiosity turning to fascination. "I have no idea," I admitted. He stayed for a while, helping me lift the heavy ledger books out and placing them on the table. We flipped through a couple. They were written in an old-fashioned script, and the content was dense. It wasn't a diary, that was for sure. It was filled with names, dates, and sums of money. Numbers of cattle, bushels of wheat, but also other things. Payments for assistance, security, fees, favor, costs. I thanked Eric, paid him more than the favor was worth, and sent him on his way. Then I sat down and began to read. It took me a week. I did it in fits and starts, mostly after work, sitting on my sleeping bag on the floor because I still hadn't bought a couch. The letter in the box was a will, but it wasn't my great-grandfather's last will and testament. It was a set of instructions addressed to my grandmother, his daughter. "I assume you have found this," the letter began, "or someone has. We have kept this secret for too long. It is our inheritance. It is our shame." As I read, the world outside the farmhouse seemed to fall away. My great-grandfather, Willie, wasn't just a farmer. He was a fixer, a man of influence. He'd built this farm not just with sweat and grain, but with power. He was a local judge during the 40s and 50s, but more than that, he was the gatekeeper. He knew the right people, the wrong people, and everyone in between. The ledgers weren't farm records. They were a log, a meticulous, terrifyingly detailed record of every bribe, every threat, every deal. Every bit of leverage he had ever collected and exerted. There were entries for the sheriff, for the local newspaper editor, for 2 state congressmen, and for a local mob boss named Salvatore, Lucky, Genovese. Names that were the stuff of local legend. The figures were staggering. The farm was never just a farm, it was a front. The basement wasn't a cellar, it was a vault. The grain sales were cover. The cattle transactions were payments for favors that included making people disappear, fixing trials, and funneling money into illegal operations. The letter detailed a plan. The iron box was a dead man's switch. If Willie ever died unexpectedly or if the heat ever got too close, the contents were to be turned over to the authorities by a lawyer in the city, bringing down the entire network. But it never came to that. Willie died of a heart attack in 1968, perfectly natural. And the secret was passed to my grandmother. She kept it, guarding it like a dragon with its gold, unsure of what to do with it. She never used it, she just held it. And she buried it in the basement, leaving it for the next generation to deal with. I called my mom. I didn't mention the ledgers or the lockbox. I just asked, "What did Grandma do?" "I mean, really? I know she was a farmer, but she had money, right? She paid for Mark's college in cash. She was always a little too wealthy for a woman who just grew corn." Mom paused for a long moment. "That's a strange question, honey. She was a shrewd businesswoman, that's all. She made good investments." "Did she ever mention a man named Salvatore Genovese?" I asked. The line went dead. For a full minute, I thought she'd hung up. Then, her voice came back, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Where did you hear that name, Charlie? It was in a box, Mom. In the basement. A box with a bunch of old papers. Another long, terrible silence. Oh, God, she whispered. She never got rid of it. I told her to burn it. I told her to just let it all go. What is it, Mom? I pressed, though I already knew. I don't know the details. I was a child. But I remember my father, your grandfather, talking to her once. He was furious. He said the secret would outlive him. That it was a poison. I never knew what he meant, not really. I just knew it scared me. Your grandmother always said it was our insurance. She told me never to look for it. I told her I'd call her back and hung up before she could ask any more questions. I was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, surrounded by these ledgers that felt more dangerous than any gun I'd ever seen. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. I almost ignored it, but I answered. What's up? I said, my voice hollow. Just checking in on the squatter, he said, his tone light and mocking. Hey, I heard from Mom. She was all flustered, said you found some old family papers. Don't tell me you found a deed to a gold mine or something. I'd have to actually be impressed. I looked at the ledgers. I thought about Mark's laugh. I thought about his smug face, his Rolex, his perfect, sterile apartment in the city. I thought about how he'd mocked me for this place, for this life I was trying to build. The basement, I said slowly, a plan forming in my mind. I dug up the basement floor to pour a new one. And I found something. It's not a gold mine. It's a nightmare. I told him, not everything, but enough. I told him about the lockbox. I told him about the ledgers. I told him about the names, the sheriff, the congressman, the mob boss. I told him about the secret, the power, the blackmail. He was silent for a long time. I could hear him breathing, the faint sound of traffic in the background. You're lying, he finally said, his voice brittle. That's insane, Grandma? She was a sweet old lady who knitted and made pies. She was a keeper of secrets, I corrected. And I have a decision to make. What do you mean? I'm going to use it, I said, lying through my teeth. This is leverage. It's the ultimate leverage. I'm going to sell it. The highest bidder. This farm will be paid off. I'll be set for life. No, Mark shouted. Are you insane? Do you know who those people are? Some of them are still alive. Some of them have kids, grandkids, who are in power. You can't just sell something like that. It's not a painting. If it's real, it's a death sentence. Or a fortune, I countered. It's all in how you market it. I'm coming up there, he said. Don't do anything stupid. I'm serious, Charlie. I'll be there tomorrow. He hung up, and I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. I knew Mark. He was driven by one thing above all else, greed. But he was also a coward. He'd never get his hands dirty, but he'd never be able to resist the scent of money. The power was intoxicating. The next day, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching a dust cloud approach from the dirt road. Mark's BMW looked comically out of place, its low suspension scraping on the ruts. He parked, got out, and practically marched up to me. He was wearing loafers and a polo shirt, utterly unprepared for the country. All right, he said, his jaw tight. Let me see them. We went inside. I had the lockbox on the table, open, with the top ledger on top. His eyes went wide. He picked up the ledger, flipping through the pages, his face draining of color. He landed on a page that mentioned a state senator I recognized from the news. A powerful man on the verge of a national appointment. This is, he stammered. Real? I said, yeah, it's real. Mark looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. You can't sell this, Charlie. This is too big. This is everything. This is the kind of thing that ends careers or lives. Which is why I'm going to sell it, I said calmly. I've already made some calls, set up a few meetings. He started pacing the creaky floor. No, you're too emotional. You'll get us both killed. You need to let me handle this. I knew it was coming. Mark's ego couldn't handle me having something he didn't. He couldn't stand the idea that the worthless farm he'd laughed at had something worth more than. He could imagine. He wasn't thinking about the danger. He was thinking about the transaction, the deal, the score. How? I asked. How would you handle it? He stopped pacing. I know a guy, he said, a calculated gleam in his eye. A real estate developer. His family has connections. I could set up a meeting, feel him out. See what they'd be willing to pay for something like this. It's a negotiation, Charlie. And I'm good at negotiations. I pretended to think about it. Fine, I said, sighing. Okay, but I'm not giving you the ledgers. Not yet. We do this together, or not at all. He agreed, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was already planning. He'd find a way to cut me out, I was sure of it. The meeting Mark set up was the next week. It wasn't at a restaurant or a lawyer's office. It was in a private dining room at a country club in the city. The man Mark introduced me to was named Arthur Sterling, a silver-haired, impeccably dressed man in his late 60s. He had the kind of easy, practiced smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was a developer, sure, but I knew from the name that his family had been connected to organized crime since the 30s. He was the modern-day prince of the underworld, a gentleman mobster. Arthur was smooth. He made small talk, complimented me on the farm, and listened with an almost paternal attention as Mark talked me up and explained the situation. When Mark finished, Arthur leaned back in his chair and fixed his eyes on me. "The ledgers," he said. "You have them with you?" I shook my head. "They're safe, in a location I've secured. I can produce them in an instant for a serious offer." Arthur nodded, a gesture of respect. "Smart. For a structural engineer, you have a good head for business." He looked at Mark. "Your brother tells me you're looking for a cash deal. A clean break." "That's the idea," I confirmed. Arthur proposed a number. It was astronomical. It was more than enough to pay off the farm 10 times over, to buy a new house, to never work a day in my life. Mark's eyes practically popped out of his head. He was already calculating his cut. "But," Arthur continued, his voice hardening slightly, "I need to ensure these records are the only ones. I need an assurance that my family's name, and that of our associates, isn't going to surface in the future. In exchange for the funds, you will provide me with all of the documents, in full, and you will never speak of this again." I looked at the number on the napkin in front of me. I looked at Mark's eager, greedy face. I looked at Arthur's cold, dead eyes. "Deal," I said. We shook hands. Arthur had a firm, dry grip. He said his attorneys would draw up the paperwork, and we could finalize the transaction the following Friday. He had one of his men drive us back to our cars. It was pouring rain, and Mark was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can you believe it?" he kept saying. "That's more money than I've made in 10 years. This is the best thing that has ever happened to us. I can't believe you were going to just sell it to some random guy. You needed me for this." We drove back to the farm in separate cars. I got there first. I went into the house and went straight to the basement. I put on a pair of thick work gloves and a heavy-duty face mask. Then, I took a gas can I had stashed under the stairs, opened the big, heavy lid of the iron box and doused everything inside: the ledgers, the letters, the deeds, the red velvet, all of it, with the gasoline. Mark came in through the kitchen door, shouting my name. "Charlie, where are you? I want to go over the details for the meeting with Arthur." He came down the stairs, his footsteps echoing. He stopped dead when he saw me, the gasoline can in my hand, the box of documents glistening with fuel. "What the hell are you doing?" he screamed. He tried to rush me, but I was ready. I struck a match, the flame bright and sharp in the dim light. I dropped it into the box. There was a soft whump, and the flames erupted, licking up the side of the iron container and filling the basement with a thick, acrid smoke. Mark froze, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You idiot, you just burned a fortune." "Our fortune? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked at him over the roaring fire. "I just saved our lives, you dumbass. Arthur Sterling is a gentleman, but the people he works for? They're not. You think they would have let us walk away with that money? They would have paid us, and we would have had a tragic accident on the way home. The money was our death sentence, not our reward." He was speechless. His mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. The fire was blazing now, the intense heat forcing us both back up the stairs. We stood in the kitchen, the flames reflected in his panicked eyes. "What do we do?" he finally whispered, his voice trembling. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Arthur Sterling had given me. "It's Charlie," I said into the receiver. "There's been a complication. The documents are gone. There was an accident, a fire. It's all gone." I heard Arthur's controlled voice on the other end. "An accident?" "Yes," I confirmed. "The farm is old, faulty wiring. It happened just a few minutes ago. My brother and I are standing here watching it burn. Everything. The lockbox, the ledgers, all of it. It's ash." There was a long pause. Then a cold chuckle. "A real shame. A terrible loss of history." He paused again. "I'm sorry, Charlie." "Mark, That's a terrible thing to happen to your childhood home. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. It's a tragedy. Mark stared at me, his face a mix of relief, confusion, and horror. The deed was done. The secret was gone. I had just saved us both, but Mark would never see it that way. He would only ever see the money. The price I paid was giving up a future of wealth and security. The cost to him was his reputation and the respect he'd never get back. Well, Mark said, his voice hollow as we walked out of the farmhouse. The fire engine sirens wailing in the distance. I guess you get to keep your worthless little farm. Quote, he was right, in a way. I had nothing but the land and the charred memory of the house. But as the firefighters arrived and the rain turned the sky to mud, I realized I had a lot more than he did. I had peace. And my brother? He had to live with the knowledge that I was the one who found the fortune. And I was the one who let it go up in smoke. He drove away that night, his pristine BMW splattered with mud, and he didn't look back. I haven't spoken to him since the insurance company paid out the claim. He thinks I'm an idiot. He called me a fool. But I don't care. See, they say one man's trash is another man's treasure. But sometimes, a man's treasure is just his family's trash, wrapped in a different kind of guilt. And sometimes, the most valuable thing you can bury isn't a secret, it's the greed that would have destroyed you. I'm not sure if I did the right thing. But I know I did the only thing I could live with. And in the end, that's all that really matters. The farm is quiet now. I plan to rebuild, just a modest house, not the sprawling mess it was. Something small, something I own. The land itself feels cleaner, somehow. Like it was purged. I'll grow vegetables. I'll fix the fence. I'll live a quiet life. And every time I see my brother's face on a billboard for a new condo development, I'll remember the day he got caught in a lie of his own making. Story number 2. My family called me a failure for renting an apartment, then they found out I owned the entire building. My family called me a failure for renting an apartment, then they found out I owned the entire building. I'm Emily Carter, I'm 31 years old. And for the last 6 years my family has treated me like the disappointment of the household. Because I still rent an apartment, while my siblings own houses with white picket fences and matching SUVs in the driveway. What none of them knew, until 3 weeks ago, is that the apartment building I live in is mine. Not the unit, the building, all 42 units of it. Plus the little coffee shop on the ground floor that I lease out to a sweet older couple named Frank and Donna Pruitt. I bought it 4 years ago through an LLC with a name that has nothing to do with me. And I have spent every family dinner since then quietly eating my mashed potatoes while my mother, Linda Carter, sighs about how I never got my life together like my brother and sister. Let me back up. Growing up, my parents Linda and Gary Carter always measured success in one currency, homeownership. My father worked 30 years at a manufacturing plant in Ohio, saved every dollar, and bought a modest 3-bedroom house when he was 26. In his mind, and in my mother's mind, that was the finish line of adulthood. You get a stable job, you buy a house, you have kids, you mow your lawn on Saturdays. And that's a life well lived. I don't disagree with that path. I just didn't take it, and that apparently made me a walking cautionary tale at every Thanksgiving. My older sister, Jessica Whitfield, married her college boyfriend Brian Whitfield right after graduation. They bought a house in the same suburb where we grew up, had 2 kids. And Jessica became the golden child overnight. My younger brother, Kevin Carter, is 2 years younger than me, works in insurance, and bought a starter home last year with his fiancée, a woman named Ashley Rayner. The second Kevin closed on that house. My mother posted 17 photos on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of my son the homeowner." I got a text that said congrats and nothing else that week, even though it was also my birthday. I studied finance in college, which nobody in my family understood the point of. Since in their eyes a finance degree either means you become an accountant or you waste your potential doing something they can't picture. After graduation I got a job at a regional investment firm in Columbus. And instead of pouring every paycheck into a down payment on a house I couldn't really afford yet, I started reading everything I could about real estate investing. I lived cheap. I drove a used Honda Civic for 9 years. I brought lunch to work in the same Tupperware container until the lid cracked. My roommate at the time, a woman named Priya Nair, used to joke that I ate like a broke college kid despite making decent money, and she wasn't wrong. Because every extra dollar I had was going into a savings account I refused to touch. By the time I was 27, I had enough saved for a down payment on a small multifamily property. A rundown 4-unit building on the edge of town that nobody wanted because the roof needed work. And 2 of the units were basically uninhabitable. I bought it anyway, fixed it up slowly using contractors I vetted carefully, and rented out the units. It wasn't glamorous. I spent weekends unclogging drains and arguing with a plumber named Walter Higgins about invoice discrepancies. But it worked. 2 years later I refinanced, pulled equity out, and bought a second property. An 8-unit building, then a third. By the time I turned 29, I had enough cash flow and equity built up to make an offer on a 42-unit apartment building in a growing part of the city, the same building I now live in, on the top floor. In a unit I renovated myself with a walk-in closet twice the size of my childhood bedroom. I told my family none of this, partly because early on I was superstitious about jinxing it, and partly because, if I'm being honest, I liked having something that was entirely mine. Something nobody could weigh in on or criticize or tell me I was doing wrong. My family has opinions about everything, from how I season my food to how I part my hair. And this was the one part of my life that stayed untouched by their commentary. The trouble is, when you're this secretive about your success, you accidentally let people believe the opposite. When my mother asked why I still rented, I just said rent was easier for my lifestyle. When my father asked if I was ever going to settle down and buy something real, I changed the subject. When Jessica invited the whole family over to see her new kitchen renovation, complete with quartz countertops and a farmhouse sink, she looked at me across the room and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's okay, Em, not everyone's cut out for this kind of thing." I laughed it off. I always laughed it off. The comments got worse over time, not better. At my brother Kevin's engagement party, my grandmother, Dorothy Carter, who is 83 years old and has never filtered a thought in her life, patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, some people just aren't built for responsibility." I remember smiling so hard my jaw hurt. My cousin Megan Foster, who has always been competitive with me since we were kids, once asked in front of the whole extended family whether I was still throwing money away on rent. Like it was the most pitiful thing a person could do with their life. Nobody in that room knew that the rent checks from 41 other tenants were being deposited into my account every single month, not the other way around. I started dating someone around that time too, a guy named Tyler Reyes, who worked as a contractor and actually knew about my properties because he'd done work on 2 of them before we ever met. Tyler used to get so frustrated on my behalf whenever we'd leave a family dinner and I'd be quiet. In the car, he'd say, "Why don't you just tell them, Em? You built something incredible. Why do you let them talk to you like that?" And I never had a good answer. I think part of me just didn't want my success to become a performance for people who'd never really seen me for who I actually was. I wanted the one place they couldn't touch. Things came to a head over the 4th of July. Every year my parents host a big family barbecue. And every year it turns into an unofficial competition of who has accomplished more since the last barbecue. This year Jessica and Brian had just added a pool to their backyard. Kevin and Ashley had just gotten pre-approved for a slightly bigger house they were planning to move into, and I had just closed on my 4th property, a 12-unit building near the university. But obviously nobody at that barbecue knew that. My mother pulled me aside near the drink cooler and said something that finally cracked something open in me. She said, "Emily, I love you, but I worry about you. You're 31. You have nothing to show for your life. No house, no husband, no kids. Your sister has a family and a home. Your brother is about to have both. What do you have?" I stood there holding a paper plate of potato salad, and something in me just went quiet and cold. I thought about the 42 families whose homes I maintained. I thought about the local plumber, Walter, and the electrician, a man named Dominic Ruiz, both of whom I kept steadily employed through repairs and renovations. I thought about Frank and Donna Pruitt downstairs who told me weekly how grateful they were that I never raised their lease rate more than they could handle. I thought about the tenant on the 3rd floor, a single mother named Courtney Hale, whose rent I quietly reduced last winter when she lost her job, without telling anyone. Because it was the right thing to do and I didn't need credit for it. I didn't say any of that to my mother though. I just said, "I'm doing fine, Mom," and walked back to the barbecue. That night, driving home, I called my best friend, Sam Patterson. Who has known about my properties from the very beginning and has been begging me for years to just tell my family the truth. Sam said, I get wanting to keep something for yourself. But at some point protecting your peace and protecting a secret become two different things. You're not protecting your peace anymore. You're just letting them hurt you for no reason. She was right. I hung up the phone and decided I was done. The opportunity came a few weeks later, almost by accident. My father mentioned that he needed some renovation work done on the house. Something with the plumbing, and I said I knew a great contractor who could help. He asked how I knew him. I said, he's done work for me before, on my building. My father laughed and said, your apartment doesn't need much work, does it? It's not that big. And I said, no, not my apartment. My building. There was a pause. I explained everything, calmly. The way I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times over the years but never said out loud. I told him about the first 4-unit property I bought at 27. I told him about the LLC. I told him I owned the 42-unit building I lived in, and 2 other properties besides. I told him the numbers, roughly. Not to brag but because I think some part of me needed him to understand exactly what he'd been calling a failure for years. My father didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, does your mother know this? I said no, nobody did, except Tyler and Sam. He asked me to come over that weekend and explain everything to the both of them. I did. I brought printouts, tax documents with the identifying details blacked out, photos of the properties, even a copy of the LLC formation paperwork. My mother sat at the kitchen table reading through everything with her hand over her mouth. My father kept rereading the same page like the numbers might change if he stared long enough. My mother finally looked up and said, why didn't you tell us? I told her the truth. I said every time I tried to talk about my life, I was met with comparisons to Jessica's house or Kevin's engagement or someone else's version of success. I said I got tired of trying to explain something they'd already decided didn't count. I told her about Grandma calling me irresponsible at Kevin's party. About Jessica's comment at the kitchen renovation. About Megan's remark at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. My mother's face went through about 4 different emotions in the span of a minute, landing somewhere between shame and disbelief. She said, quietly, we just wanted you to be settled, Emily. We didn't understand you had settled something bigger than any of us. I won't pretend that one conversation fixed 6 years of feeling small in my own family. It didn't, but something did shift. My father started asking real questions about the business. About cap rates and vacancy and how I evaluated new properties. Questions that felt less like interrogation and more like genuine curiosity for the first time in my adult life. My mother apologized, which she almost never does, and admitted she'd been projecting her own fears about financial instability onto me without ever asking what my actual life looked like. Word got around the family fast after that, the way it always does. My grandmother Dorothy called me the following week and, in her usual unfiltered way, said, well, I suppose I owe you an apology, and also, do you have any units available? Because your Uncle Frank's lease is up next spring. I laughed harder than I had in months. Jessica's reaction was more complicated. When she found out, she texted me a single, wow, that's crazy. Good for you, and then didn't bring it up again for weeks. I think some part of her had built her own self-worth around being the successful one in the family, and finding out I'd quietly built something bigger than her kitchen renovation rattled that a little. Eventually, at a family dinner, she pulled me aside and said, half joking and half not, I might have been a little bit of a jerk about the renting thing. I told her it was fine, even though it had never really been fine, because I didn't want to hold on to it forever. Kevin, to his credit, was the most straightforwardly excited about it. He actually asked if I'd walk him and Ashley through the numbers on their new house, wanting to understand mortgages and equity better. And we ended up having a genuinely good conversation about finances for the first time in our adult lives. Ashley told me later that Kevin had been quietly stressed about the size of the mortgage they were taking on, and that talking to me actually helped him feel less alone in that stress. That felt like the real win, more than any of the apologies. Tyler was the one who noticed the biggest change in me, honestly. He said I stood differently at family events now, like I wasn't bracing for a comment anymore. He wasn't wrong. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly defending a life nobody bothered to actually look at, and having that weight lifted felt like being able to breathe through my whole ribcage for the first time in years. I still think about my mother's question sometimes, the one she asked at the barbecue. What do you have? I have 42 families who trust me to keep a roof over their heads. I have a coffee shop downstairs that smells like cinnamon every morning because of Donna. I have a plumber and an electrician and a property manager who all have steady work because of decisions I made when nobody was watching or cheering me on. I have a partner who saw the whole picture before my own family did. I have a version of success that doesn't look like a picket fence. And for a long time I let people convince me that meant it didn't count. It counts. It always counted. I just had to stop waiting for permission to say so. These days, when my mother tells her friends about her daughter, she doesn't say, "Emily rents an apartment," anymore. She says, "My daughter owns real estate," which still makes me laugh a little. Because she says it the same way she used to brag about Jessica's kitchen. Like she's been rehearsing the sentence for months, just waiting for the chance to use it. I guess in the end I got the thing I actually wanted, not the bragging rights, but just to be seen clearly by the people who are supposed to know me best. It took longer than it should have. And it cost more quiet dinners and swallowed comments than I'd like to admit. But I have it now, and honestly, that's worth more to me than any amount of square footage ever could be. Update. I did not expect to be writing an update to this so soon, but a lot has happened since I posted. And honestly, I think some of you predicted exactly how this would go. Especially the people who warned me that Jessica's, "Wow, that's crazy." Good for you. Text was not the end of the story. It wasn't, not even close. For those just finding this now, I'm Emily Carter, 31. And a few months ago my family found out I own a 42-unit apartment building along with 2 other rental properties, after years of them calling me a failure for just renting an apartment. My father Gary came around pretty quickly. My mother Linda apologized and has genuinely tried to do better. My grandmother Dorothy asked about vacancies. My brother Kevin actually leaned into learning more about finances because of it. Jessica, my older sister, gave me a flat congratulations and went quiet. I said in the original post that Jessica's reaction felt complicated, and I want to be fair to her. Because I don't think she's a bad person. I think she just built a lot of her identity around being the responsible, accomplished one in the family. And finding out I'd quietly built something bigger than her kitchen renovation knocked something loose in her that she hadn't dealt with yet. That became very clear about 6 weeks after my original post, at my niece's birthday party. Jessica and her husband Brian Whitfield hosted it in their backyard. The same backyard with the new pool she'd shown off at that dinner where she told me, "Not everyone's cut out for this kind of thing." It was a nice party, kids running around, my mother fussing over the food table, my father manning the grill with Kevin. I brought a gift for my niece and mostly kept to myself near the drink table, talking to Tyler and my cousin Megan Foster, who has actually warmed up a lot since finding out about the properties and has been asking me genuine questions about how to start investing herself. At some point Jessica had a couple of glasses of wine and the conversation drifted, the way it always seems to at these things, toward comparing lives. She was talking to a group of her mom friends from the neighborhood, and I overheard her say, loud enough that it was clearly meant to be heard, "It's funny. My sister used to just rent some apartment and everyone thought she was struggling. Turns out she was sitting on all this money the whole time and let us think she was some kind of charity case. Kind of messed up, honestly, to let your own family worry about you like that." I felt my stomach drop, because that is not what happened, and she knows it's not what happened. Nobody was worried about me out of love. I was mocked. There's a very big difference between concern and contempt. And I lived through 6 years of the second one from her specifically. I didn't say anything in the moment. Tyler looked at me like he wanted to say something, and I just shook my head slightly. Because I didn't want to turn my niece's birthday party into a scene. But my mother heard it too, apparently. Because about 10 minutes later I saw her walk over to Jessica and pull her aside near the garage. And even from a distance I could tell by my mother's body language that it was not a gentle conversation. Later that night my mother called me and told me what she'd said to Jessica, which was, roughly, that Jessica did not get to rewrite history to make herself the victim of my success. And that if anyone in this family owed anyone an apology for years of comments about failure and responsibility, it was Jessica, not me. My mother said Jessica got defensive at first, said she didn't mean it that way, but eventually admitted she'd been feeling insecure ever since finding out. Because she said it made her feel like her whole life, the house, the pool, the kids, had somehow been less impressive, now that people knew what I'd actually built. I understood that on a human level, I really did, because insecurity does strange things to people. But understanding it didn't make it okay, and I told my mother that. I said Jessica spent years making me feel small for a choice that turned out to be the smartest financial decision of my life, and now that the truth was out, she still found a way to make herself the one who deserved sympathy. My mother agreed with me, which honestly surprised me, because a few months ago she probably would have told me to let it go and keep the peace. Jessica texted me the next day, an actual real apology this time, not the one line, "Wow. Good for you," from before. She said she'd been struggling with some things about her own life that had nothing to do with me. That she and Brian had been having financial stress they hadn't told anyone about because Brian had switched jobs and taken a pay cut, and that some of what she said had come from a place of feeling like she was falling behind even though from the outside her life looked put together. She said finding out about my properties had made those private fears louder, and instead of dealing with them she'd taken it out on me at the party. I appreciated the honesty, and I told her that. I also told her that her feelings about her own life were valid and worth working through. But they were never an excuse for the years of comments before any of this came out. Back when she genuinely thought I was just renting an apartment with no plan and no future, and mocked me for it anyway. She didn't have an answer for that part, and I think that's because there isn't a good one. We're working on it, it's not fixed, but we're talking. And she asked if she could come by my building sometime and actually see it, which felt like a real step instead of a performative one. The more unexpected part of this update actually involves my father. About 2 months after my original post, my dad asked if we could get coffee, just the two of us, which we almost never do. He told me that finding out about my properties had made him think a lot about his own retirement, since he's 63 now and planning to retire from the plant in the next couple of years. He said he and my mother had a decent amount saved, but nowhere near what they'd need to feel secure, and he asked, almost sheepishly, if I'd be willing to walk him through how real estate investing actually worked, not as a lecture, but as a real conversation between two adults. That conversation turned into several conversations, which turned into my father asking if I'd consider partnering with him on a small property. Something modest, using part of his retirement savings alongside my experience and management. I was hesitant at first, because mixing family and money is its own kind of risk. And Tyler actually cautioned me pretty hard about it, given everything that had happened. But my father and I sat down and wrote out actual terms, real ones, reviewed by an attorney friend of mine named Patricia Nguyen. So nothing was left vague or based on assumptions. We closed on a small 6-unit property together about 3 weeks ago. My father has been showing up on weekends in old jeans, helping with minor repairs alongside Walter, the plumber I've used for years, asking questions about tenant screening and lease terms like a kid in school. It's been one of the strangest and most healing things to watch, honestly. My father, who spent 30 years believing homeownership was the only real marker of success, learning an entirely different model of building something from his daughter, the one he used to worry about. My mother has come around too, in her own way. She started telling her friends at church about the properties, plural, with this note of pride in her voice that still catches me off guard every time I hear it. She asked me last week if I'd help Kevin and Ashley think through whether they should refinance their new house, and I did. And Kevin actually thanked me afterward in a way that felt like real respect instead of polite obligation. Grandma Dorothy did, in fact, end up on my waiting list, and moved into a first-floor unit in my original 4-unit building last month, close to her doctor and her favorite bakery. She tells everyone at her bridge club that her granddaughter is her landlord now. And apparently she thinks this is hilarious, because she brings it up constantly, usually followed by asking if she can get a discount for being the favorite tenant, which she is absolutely not getting, though I did let her paint her front door the shade of yellow she wanted even though it's technically against the property guidelines. Tyler and I are doing well too. He proposed about a month ago, actually, right there on the rooftop of my building, which sounds like a movie moment but mostly just involved him being incredibly nervous and frank, and Donna Pruitt from the coffee shop downstairs pretending very badly not to watch through the window. I said yes. My mother cried. My father hugged Tyler for an uncomfortably long time and told him he was proud to have him managing plumbing repairs and joining the family in the same year, which made everyone laugh. The biggest shift, honestly, isn't the money or the properties or even the apology from Jessica. It's that for the first time in years, family dinners don't feel like a performance I have to survive. Nobody's measuring my worth against a mortgage anymore. My father asks about cap rates instead of comparing my life to Kevin's. My mother tells her friends about her daughter's real estate instead of quietly worrying I have nothing to show for myself. Even Jessica, slowly, carefully, is starting to ask real questions instead of making comparisons. I used to think the secrecy protected me. Looking back now, I think what actually protected me was finally telling the truth and refusing to shrink myself to keep other people comfortable in their assumptions about what success is supposed to look like. It turns out my family didn't need me to have a house with a picket fence. They just needed the truth, and once they had it, most of them were willing to grow alongside it. Not everyone gets that kind of ending. I know that. I got lucky that my family, messy and imperfect as they are, were willing to look at themselves honestly once the truth was in front of them. I'm grateful for that, even the uncomfortable parts. Because the uncomfortable parts are usually where the real change happens. I'll probably post again if anything else develops. Especially with the property my dad and I bought together. Since that's a whole new chapter I did not see coming a year ago. Final update. I didn't think I'd be back here again. But a lot of you asked me to circle back after the wedding and after things settled with my dad's property, so here it is, probably the last update on this whole saga. Because at this point the drama has mostly turned into just, well, life. Which I think is actually the happiest ending I could have asked for. Quick recap for anyone new. I'm Emily Carter, 32 now. And for years my family treated me like a failure because I rented an apartment while my siblings owned homes, when in reality I owned the entire 42-unit building I lived in, along with several other properties, and had simply never told them. When the truth came out, most of my family came around. My sister Jessica had a rockier road. And my father Gary and I ended up buying a property together. And I got engaged to my partner Tyler Reyes. The wedding happened 2 months ago. We got married in the courtyard of my very first property. The little 4-unit building I bought when I was 27 with the cracked roof and the 2 uninhabitable units, the one where my grandmother Dorothy now lives on the first floor. It felt important to have it there instead of some rented venue. Because that building is where all of this actually started. Back when I was eating cheap groceries out of a cracked Tupperware container and telling no one what I was building, my mother Linda cried through basically the entire ceremony. Which honestly she'd probably deny if you asked her, but I have video proof. My father walked me down the little makeshift aisle we set up between the buildings. And right before he handed me off to Tyler, he leaned in and said, quietly, so only I could hear, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you. I nearly ruined my makeup right there on the spot." Grandma Dorothy, in full Dorothy fashion, stood up during the toasts, completely uninvited, and announced to the whole crowd that she was proud to say her granddaughter was not only smart enough to build an empire but also generous enough to let an old woman live in it without raising the rent, which got a huge laugh, though I want to be clear for the record that I did eventually make her repaint her front door back to the approved color after the honeymoon. Kevin gave a toast too, which surprised me, because Kevin has never been the toast-giving type. He talked about how growing up he always felt like he had to keep up with some invisible measuring stick in our family, and how watching me finally get recognized for building something real, quietly, patiently, without needing anyone's permission, actually gave him permission to stop measuring his own life against other people's timelines. He and Ashley set their wedding date for next spring. And he told me privately afterward that he wasn't in a rush anymore. That watching my story unfold had taught him there's no prize for getting to milestones fastest. Jessica was there too, and this is maybe the part I'm proudest of, honestly. More than the building or the business. She and I had spent the months leading up to the wedding actually rebuilding things, slowly. She came by my building like she said she would, walked through every hallway, met some of my tenants, sat in the coffee shop with Frank and Donna Pruitt for almost 2 hours one afternoon just talking. She told me later that seeing it in person, the actual work of it, the maintenance requests and the tenant relationships and the years of unglamorous effort, made her finally understand it wasn't luck or some secret pile of money I'd been hiding out of spite. It was just work, the kind nobody claps for while you're doing it. At the wedding, she gave a small toast too, much shorter than Kevin's. Mostly just a simple line that meant more to me than she probably realized. She said, "My sister taught me that the version of success you can see from the outside isn't always the real one, and I'm sorry it took me this long to actually look." Brian squeezed her hand the whole time she said it. I hugged her afterward and we both cried a little. Which is not something Jessica and I have ever really done together, not since we were kids. Things between her and Brian have improved too, from what I understand. After that conversation at the birthday party where the financial stress came out, they sat down and actually addressed it instead of pretending everything was fine. Brian ended up taking a different job with better pay, and Jessica went back to work part-time doing marketing consulting, something she'd put on hold years ago. She told me it felt strange but good to be building something of her own again instead of just measuring her worth by the house and the pool. The property my father and I bought together has been its own kind of joy. He retired from the plant about a month ago, and instead of the quiet, aimless retirement my mother was worried about, he's been out there every week, working alongside me and Walter the plumber and Dominic the electrician, learning the business hands-on. He handles a lot of the tenant relations now, actually, because it turns out 30 years of managing a factory floor made him unexpectedly great at handling maintenance complaints and lease renewals with patience I honestly don't always have myself. We're already looking at a second property together, and he started talking about it with this energy I haven't seen in him in years. Like he found a second career he didn't know he wanted. My mother has fully leaned into her new role as, in her words, the mother of a real estate mogul, which is a title I never asked for and find deeply embarrassing every time she uses it at church. But I've stopped fighting it because I think some part of her needed the pride as much as I needed the acknowledgement. She started actually asking me real questions about the business instead of just bragging about it, wanting to understand vacancy rates and property taxes, and last month she asked, half joking and half not, whether it was too late for her to get involved too. I told her it's never too late, and I meant it. I think about that 4th of July barbecue a lot. The one where my mother stood next to the drink cooler and asked me what I had to show for my life. I have a building full of tenants who trust me. I have a father who found a second calling at 63. I have a mother who finally sees me clearly. I have a sister who rebuilt something with me instead of tearing it down. I have a brother who stopped measuring his life against a stopwatch. I have a grandmother repainting doors against the rules. I have a husband, now, who saw all of it before anyone else did and never once made me feel like I had to prove it to be worth loving. I used to think success was something you had to defend, that if people didn't understand it, the problem was with them or with me, one or the other. What I learned through all of this is that sometimes people just need the truth laid out plainly in front of them before they can actually see what was there the whole time. My family didn't need proof that I was successful. They needed permission to let go of the one narrow definition they'd built their whole understanding of worth around, and once they had that, most of them took it and ran. That's really the whole story. No more secrets, no more quiet dinners spent bracing for the next comment about failure. Just a family, imperfect and stubborn and occasionally infuriating, finally seeing each other the way we probably should have all along. Thank you to everyone who followed this from the beginning. I don't think I'll have another update after this one, not because nothing else will happen. Life keeps happening to everyone, but because the story I actually needed to tell is finished now. The rest is just living it. Story number 3. My mom's new husband tried to kick me out of my childhood home. I quietly handed him the deed. I'm 30F, my mom is 57, and her husband Gary is 61. This happened in the western suburbs outside Chicago. In the same house with the same crooked mailbox and the same hydrangea bushes my dad planted when I was in middle school. When I say childhood home, I mean the actual house that still smells faintly like lemon pledge and old books in the winter. The house where my height is penciled inside the pantry door. The house where my dad taught me how to patch drywall badly and where my mom used to sit at the kitchen island in Scrubs drinking grocery store Pinot after long shifts at the dental office. So yes, I'm aware that being 30 and still emotionally attached to a house sounds a little ridiculous. I know houses are just houses. But if you've ever had one place be the center of your family for your entire life, you probably get it. For background, my parents weren't rich. Comfortable sometimes, stretched thin other times, very normal suburban middle class. My dad, Mike, sold commercial flooring. My mom, Denise, was a dental hygienist. My dad was one of those guys who knew every neighbor's dog by name and had a garage full of tools he swore were organized in a system that nobody else could understand. My mom liked throw pillows, Costco candles, and pretending we were the kind of family who naturally had fresh fruit arranged in bowls instead of just buying too many clementines and hoping for the best. The house itself was a two-story colonial in St. Charles with blue-gray siding. A deck my dad rebuilt twice because the first time he refused to measure properly. And a finished basement that was never really finished so much as good enough. I grew up there. I had my first heartbreak there. I left for college from that driveway with my whole life crammed into my dad's SUV. Then life got messier, the way it always does. My dad got sick when I was 24. Colon cancer. He was dead 10 months later. I don't need to dramatize that part because anyone who's watched someone shrink in front of them knows exactly what that was like. The meal trains, the casseroles, the weird brightness of hospital hallways at 5 a.m. The fake cheerful nurses' voices, the paperwork. My mom did that thing a lot of women her age do where they keep functioning because somebody has to. And then 6 months later they suddenly can't remember why they walked into a room and burst into tears over a broken paper towel holder. Financially, it was bad. Not catastrophic in a movie way, but real life bad. Dad had more debt than either of us realized. Between medical bills, a refinance he'd done a few years earlier, and the fact that he'd always been the one handling the big money stuff, my mom ended up with the house but not really the ability to keep it comfortably. She could make the monthly payment, technically, but only if nothing else ever went wrong. And of course things always go wrong. The AC went, then her car transmission, then the roof started leaking over the upstairs hall closet. I had a decent job by then. I worked in UX design for a healthcare software company in Chicago. Nothing glamorous, but solid money, good benefits, mostly normal coworkers. I rented a one-bedroom in Logan Square with exposed brick and terrible soundproofing and thought I was doing pretty well for myself. My mom called me one Sunday in February, right after a snowstorm, and tried to sound casual while asking if I knew anything about home equity loans. I knew immediately it was worse than she was admitting. I drove out that night. She had all these papers spread over the dining room table in neat little piles like if she made them tidy enough, they wouldn't be scary. Mortgage statements, tax bills, insurance renewal, a handwritten list of numbers on a legal pad. She kept saying things like, "It's not an emergency," which in mom language meant it absolutely was. Long story short, after a lot of uncomfortable conversations and one meeting with a financial advisor friend of mine, I bought the house from my mom. I know that sounds weird. And every time I explain it people make a face like I either scammed her or she scammed me. But neither was true. We did it legally. She got enough out of the sale to pay off some debt and breathe again. I put down a big chunk of my savings, took out the mortgage in my own name, and we agreed she could keep living there basically for the cost of utilities and groceries until she was in a better place. The understanding was that it kept the house in the family, kept her stable. And one day if I wanted to live there permanently, we'd deal with that then. My mom cried in the title office parking lot afterward because she said she felt like she'd failed. I cried too because I was exhausted and because the idea of my dad's house becoming a bank-owned listing with sad Zillow photos made me feel physically ill. So yes, from that point on, legally, the house was mine. We didn't exactly advertise that fact. My Aunt Julie knew. My best friend Tessa knew because she'd helped me panic drink Sauvignon Blanc while I filled out mortgage paperwork. My mom's sister knew. A couple of close family friends knew. But to most people, including neighbors, coworkers, random cousins, it just looked like my mom still lived in her house and I was being a helpful daughter. Honestly, I preferred it that way. My mom was embarrassed enough already. I wasn't interested in lording it over her. I never called it my house to her. I never held it above her head. If something broke, I paid for it. If I came by and saw the gutters overflowing or the landscaping getting out of hand, I handled it. It wasn't a control thing. It was just practical. For almost 3 years, it worked. Then my mom met Gary. She met him at a friend's backyard 4th of July cookout. He was recently divorced, tall, tan in that leathery golf course way, with expensive sunglasses perched on his head and the kind of confidence some women read as charming and some read as exhausting. He worked in regional sales for some industrial HVAC company and lived in a condo in Naperville. He drove a black F-150 that looked absurdly clean for something that size. He called everyone, kiddo, or chief, even people his own age. At first, I tried to be happy for her. She had been lonely, really lonely. She'd spent so many years being part of a unit that after my dad died, the house felt too quiet even to me, and I wasn't the one sleeping in it every night. So when she started smiling at her phone and mentioning, this guy Gary, who took her to a rooftop restaurant in the city and sent flowers to her office, just because, I did what decent daughters are supposed to do. I listened, I asked questions, I pretended not to notice when every story about him somehow circled back to how generous he was. The first time I met him, he brought a bottle of Camus to dinner and talked for 20 straight minutes about his son Brandon's CrossFit gym without once asking me anything about myself except, "So, you in the city still or what?" There was just something about him that made my shoulders creep up toward my ears. He laughed too hard at his own jokes. He referred to my mom as this beautiful lady, in a way that felt more performative than affectionate. He made tiny assumptions and stated them like facts. When I said I worked in tech, he went, "Ah, one of those work from laptop people," and chuckled like that was inherently adorable. My mom liked him because he was decisive. That was the word she used. He's decisive. Which is true, I guess, if by decisive you mean he had a strong opinion about literally everything. From where they should eat dinner to how often people should wash bath towels. They dated fast, not scandal fast, but definitely divorced people in the suburbs fast. Within 5 months he had a drawer in her bathroom. Within 7, his golf clubs were in the garage. By Christmas, he was talking about our future in that house while standing in my dad's kitchen. That was the first moment I really thought, oh, this could become a problem. I still had my apartment in Chicago at that point, so I wasn't there constantly. But I came out most weekends. Partly to see my mom and partly because the house still needed occasional work. Every time I came over, there was another little Gary footprint. My dad's old snow shovel got replaced with a fancy ergonomic one because the old one was junk. The framed picture of me and my parents at my college graduation got moved from the living room bookshelf to the upstairs hall and replaced with a photo of Gary and my mom at some vineyard in Michigan. He hung this huge metal sign in the garage that said Dad's Garage, which would have been weird enough even if he had been my dad or if the garage had not spent 25 years being the one place in the house where my actual dad's presence still felt immediate. I took the sign down and leaned it against the freezer. Gary put it back up. I took it down again and left it by the trash cans. He texted me, thought maybe we could act like adults instead of moving things around behind each other's backs. That was our first real conflict, and I wish I could say I had some amazing line. But I just wrote back, "It's not your garage to label." He responded with a thumbs up emoji, which somehow felt ruder than if he'd cursed me out. My mom called me an hour later asking why I was making things tense. That was also the first time I realized she had already slipped into smoothing him over. Not defending him exactly, more like adjusting the room around him so he'd never have to feel friction. A year after they met, they got married. Not a big wedding, backyard ceremony, 30-ish people, blush flowers from a florist in Geneva. Catered pasta, my Aunt Julie drunk by 5 p.m. Gary wore one of those light blue suits older men buy when they want everyone to know they're not stuffy. My mom looked beautiful and also slightly nervous. Like somebody on a cruise ship pretending not to notice the boat rocking. They didn't tell me they'd set the date until after the venue deposit was paid because Mom said she didn't want opinions. Again, I tried. I bought her a KitchenAid mixer in the color she wanted. I smiled in pictures. I gave a toast that was polite and short and managed not to mention my dad once, which felt like a magic trick. After the wedding, Gary moved into the house full-time. That's when all his little habits stopped being annoying and started being territorial. He changed where the cereal was kept because it makes more sense over here. He started parking in the left side of the garage, which had always been my mom's side because the right side was narrower and my dad was weirdly proud that he could squeeze his SUV into it without scraping the shelving. He referred to the den as my office, even though it had been the room where my dad used to watch football in a recliner, with one arm duct taped underneath. He also had this ongoing thing about adult children, boomeranging. Apparently, he had very strong feelings about people over 25 living with their parents. which would have been easier to ignore if he didn't say it every single time some article came on TV about housing prices or some friend mentioned their college-aged kid moving back after graduation. "I'm sorry," he'd say, in the tone of someone who is very much not sorry. But unless there's a real emergency, grown adults need to stand on their own 2 feet. My mom would make her tight little smile and glance at me. At that point, I still wasn't living there. I was just there often enough to hear it. Then my own life did what life likes to do and took a hard left. My landlord sold my building. And around the same time my boyfriend of 3 years decided our relationship had run its course, which is a corporate layoff phrase and should be illegal to use on a person. We'd been talking casually about engagement rings 1 month and by the next month he was telling me he thought we wanted different kinds of futures, which apparently meant he wanted to date a 25-year-old Pilates instructor who referred to cocktails as bevies. It was a fantastic season for me. My company had also gone permanently remote after office downsizing, so when my lease ended, it genuinely made sense to move back to St. Charles for a while instead of rushing into another overpriced apartment while emotionally concussed. My mom offered before I even asked. "Come home for a bit," she said. "Reset. Save money. We have plenty of room." Gary was standing in the kitchen when she said it. I remember because he did that thing where he smiled without showing teeth and took a sip of coffee before saying, "Temporary, though, right?" I said, "Yes, Gary. Temporary." That should have been my warning that he viewed my presence like a weather event. I moved back in with maybe more dignity than most people manage in that situation. I downsized a ton, put my nicer stuff in storage, kept my room pre-contained, and worked upstairs during the day with noise-canceling headphones on. I bought groceries. I had my own bathroom. I wasn't throwing parties or stumbling in drunk at 2 a.m. Mostly I worked, went to Orange Theory, saw friends, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that I was sleeping 10 feet from the wall where my teenage self had once taped up One Direction photos. And for the first month or two, it was fine. Not warm, not happy, fine. Then Gary started with the comments. "Must be nice not commuting. Back in my day, when I moved out, I stayed out. You planning on staying in your room forever, or are you looking around? Hope you're socking money away." He never said any of it in front of people who'd call him out. It was always while loading the dishwasher or standing by the grill with a beer. Delivered in that fake casual tone people use when they want the ability to deny hostility later. At first, I ignored it. Then I started answering evenly. "I do have a job, Gary. I'm not exactly freeloading. I own more of this kitchen than you do." That last one just slipped out before I could stop it. He narrowed his eyes and went, "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled and said, "Nothing." I should probably explain why I didn't just tell him immediately that I owned the house. 2 reasons. First, my mom asked me not to. More than once. She said Gary was old school, and that money stuff made him weird. She said he already felt self-conscious that he was moving into a house she'd built a life in with another man. She said if he found out the house was legally mine, he'd be humiliated. I said, then maybe he should stop acting like he runs it. She said, "Lauren, please. I just want peace." Second, I honestly kept thinking she would handle it herself. That at some point, once they were settled, she'd tell him. Or if he pushed too far, she'd shut it down. I underestimated how much she had started organizing herself around not upsetting him. The first genuinely infuriating thing happened over my dad's workshop bench. There was a section of the garage with pegboard, old paint cans, labeled screws. And this heavy scarred workbench my dad had found on Craigslist and refinished badly. It wasn't valuable in any normal sense. But it was the kind of object that felt sacred if you were me. My dad had spent hours there. It still had pencil marks and random measurements written directly into the wood. One Saturday morning I went into the garage looking for a cordless drill and found the whole area half cleared out. The vise was gone. My dad's radio was gone. The bench itself had bright blue painter's tape across it in strips. Gary was standing there with Brandon, his son, who is maybe 27 and built like a refrigerator. They were measuring the wall. I said, "What's going on?" Gary didn't even turn fully around. He said, "Making better use of the space." I looked at Brandon. Brandon shrugged in that useless way some grown men do when they're helping with something they know is shady but want the moral flexibility of acting uninvolved. I said, "Where are Dad's tools?" Gary finally faced me and said, "Relax. I boxed up a bunch of the old stuff. You weren't using it. I just stared at him. You boxed up my dad's tools? He crossed his arms. Lauren, this doesn't need to be a whole thing. Brandon and I are putting in storage cabinets and a squat rack. You can't keep every dusty relic forever. I know some people throw around the word triggered too loosely. But something in me actually snapped. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. I said, very clearly, put it back. He laughed. Not a full laugh, more a short incredulous exhale. Excuse me? Put it back. My mom came into the garage because she heard voices. She still had curlers in her hair and one earring on. I said, he moved dad's stuff. She did that awful scan women do when they're trying to assess which man in the room is the bigger problem, except in this case one of the men was her daughter on the verge of a rage blackout. Gary, she said softly, maybe we should have talked to Lauren first. He threw up his hands. About what? Cleaning a garage? This is exactly what I'm talking about. She acts like this whole house is some museum. I almost said it then. I almost said, actually it's my museum if I want it to be. But my mom shot me this pleading look, and I swallowed it. Instead I spent 3 hours reopening boxes in the basement and putting every single tool back where it belonged while Gary loudly mowed the lawn like a man in a blood feud with grass. Afterward my mom came into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I know that was upsetting, she said. I was still kneeling on the floor wrapping my dad's old socket set in shop towels because somehow Gary had tossed it into a plastic tub with extension cords and Christmas lights. You think? I said. She rubbed her forehead. He didn't mean it the way it came across. Mom, he dismantled dad's workbench to put in a squat rack. He didn't dismantle it, he taped it for measurements. She was quiet for a second, then said, he's just trying to feel at home here. That sentence did more damage than the actual workbench incident. Feel at home here. I looked at her and said, do you hear yourself? She started crying immediately, which I know sounds manipulative, but with my mom it usually wasn't. She just genuinely cried when overwhelmed. She said she was tired of feeling like she was between me and her husband. She said I was making everything harder. She said she loved me but I needed to stop treating Gary like an intruder. I remember laughing once, this dry ugly little sound, and saying, he is an intruder. That became the line she repeated back to me for months. I can't believe you called my husband an intruder. Meanwhile Gary started acting even more emboldened. Probably because he saw that she would always redirect the emotional labor toward me. He began leaving little house guidelines, notes on the fridge. Nothing overt enough to start a screaming match. Stuff like please wipe down counters after use and garage trash Monday nights and quiet hours after 10 p.m., as if we were college roommates and not two women who had lived there for decades before he arrived. My mom claimed they were, for everyone. The handwriting was his. He also took issue with my work schedule because I sometimes had West Coast calls at 5 p.m., which apparently interfered with his need to watch ESPN in the den at full volume. Once he barged halfway into my room without knocking while I was in a meeting and said, how much longer are you going to be on that? While my entire team stared at him on Zoom. I had to message, sorry, family interruption, like I was broadcasting from a barn. The tension got so normal that I started second-guessing my own reaction. Maybe I was too sensitive because it was my childhood house. Maybe any step-parent style adjustment in adulthood feels weird. Maybe I was stuck in grief and projecting. Then I'd remember details like Gary taking my dad's framed Blackhawks ticket stub collection down from the basement wall and replacing it with a giant mirror to open up the room, and I'd think no. This guy just sucks. The thing that finally pushed it from annoying to unforgivable involved his son. Brandon had a girlfriend named Kelsey who was pregnant. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Aurora and, according to Gary, were getting squeezed. Brandon's gym wasn't doing great. Kelsey worked part-time at a salon. They were trying to save money before the baby came. All of that, on its own, was fine. I actually felt bad for them. Housing is expensive, babies are expensive, and nobody needs extra stress before becoming parents. But then one Sunday after dinner, Gary announced his solution as if he were revealing a strategic masterstroke. We were in the kitchen. My mom had made lemon chicken. I was loading plates into the dishwasher. Gary was leaning against the island with a bourbon. He said, I've been thinking. And it makes the most sense for Brandon and Kelsey to come here for a while after the baby. I turned and said, come here where? He said, here. Obviously. My mom blinked. For how long? He shrugged. Few months. Maybe 6. Gives them time to get on their feet. I said, and where exactly are they going to live? He looked at me like I was dense. Upstairs. I actually laughed because I thought he meant the spare room over the garage, which barely fit a queen bed. Then he said, well, we'd probably convert your room in the office area into a nursery setup. The dish I was holding slipped in my hands and banged against the sink. I said, my room? He took a sip and nodded. You're remote. You can work from anywhere. Honestly, this might be the push you need. I looked at my mom. She looked at the lemon chicken. Mom? She said, too quickly, we were just talking through ideas. Gary corrected her immediately. No, we talked it through. It's the right thing to do. I said, you volunteered my room in a house you moved into a year ago? He gave me this tight smile. Lauren, at some point you need to accept that this is Denise's and my home now. Adult priorities change. Something cold settled into me right then. Not loud anger, just clarity. I said, no. He laughed again. No? No. Brandon and Kelsey are not moving into my room. My mom whispered, can we not do this tonight? Gary set his glass down harder than necessary. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You keep saying temporary, 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 but you've been here almost 9 months. I told you from day one I was here to regroup. And regrouping apparently means taking over an upstairs level while contributing what? Groceries. I stared at him. He kept going because men like him hear their own momentum and mistake it for righteousness. At your age, if I had to move back home, I'd be embarrassed. Instead, you've made yourself very comfortable. Meanwhile, my grandson is on the way and my actual family needs space. My actual family. I don't know if my mom noticed the way my face changed, but she finally said, Gary, stop. He didn't. He pointed toward the stairs and said, you've got plenty of options. Short-term rental, apartment, whatever. We're giving you until the end of next month. The crazy part was how calm I felt. I dried my hands on a dish towel, folded it once, and said, you're giving me? He must have heard something in my voice because he paused. Then he said, slower, yes. We're giving you until the end of next month. I looked at my mom one more time. I wanted so badly for her to say it. For her to finally tell the truth. To say, Gary, stop talking, you don't understand. But she just sat there with her lips pressed together, eyes shiny. Looking like a woman trying to survive a tornado by pretending not to feel the wind. So I said, okay. Gary seemed surprised I wasn't fighting. I went upstairs, walked into the hall closet, and took the small black fireproof lockbox off the top shelf. I had every closing document in there, along with passport copies, tax stuff, and the title paperwork because I'm the least interesting kind of millennial. The one with labeled folders. I came back down, set the box on the kitchen island, spun the combination, and pulled out the county recorded deed, the settlement statement, and a copy of the mortgage statement with my name on it. Gary frowned. What is this? I slid the papers across the granite to him. Read it. My mom actually made a sound. Not a word, just a small, panicked inhale. Gary looked down, still wearing that half-smirk people wear when they think somebody's bluffing. Then he started scanning. I watched his eyes move. The smirk disappeared first. Then the color in his face changed. He flipped to the first page again like maybe he'd misread it. The kitchen was dead silent except for the dishwasher humming. Finally he said, what the hell is this? I said, it's the deed. He looked at my mom. Denise? She looked like she wanted the floor to open up. I said, I bought the house 3 years ago. Legally. Through a title company. The mortgage, taxes, homeowner's insurance, all of it are in my name. Mom lives here because I wanted her to be able to keep the house after Dad died. Gary actually laughed, but this time it sounded thin and ugly. That's not possible. It is, Gary. You're holding it. He shuffled the pages faster, like speed might turn them into a different reality. Why the hell wasn't I told this? My mom whispered, I was going to tell you. When? She didn't answer. He turned back to me. So what, you've been holding this over our heads the whole time? I almost admired the reflex. Some people can pivot to victimhood so fast it's athletic. I said, no, I've actually been doing the opposite. I've gone out of my way not to make it an issue. Quote. He jabbed a finger at the papers. This is insane. A grown daughter owning her mother's house? A grown man trying to evict the owner from her own bedroom is also pretty insane. His mouth tightened. Don't get smart with me. I remember smiling then, which was probably not helpful but was deeply satisfying. Gary, with respect, you just told me I had 30 days to leave my own house so your son could. Move in. I'm actually being very polite. My mom started crying in earnest now, hands over her mouth. I almost felt bad for her, except I also wanted to shake her. This whole explosion existed because she kept choosing the temporary comfort of silence over the inevitable discomfort of truth. Gary pushed the papers away like they were contaminated. I moved in here. I married your mother. This affects me. I said, it sure does. He stared at me for a long second and then said, so what are you saying? I said, I'm saying you don't get to decide who lives here. I'm saying Brandon and Kelsey are not moving into my room. I'm saying if you want to stay here, you can start by apologizing for acting like this house belongs to you. He scoffed. You can't be serious. I leaned against the island, mirroring his posture from 5 minutes earlier. I'm completely serious. My mom finally found her voice. Lauren, please don't do this. And that, more than anything, made me furious. Don't do what? Correct him? State facts? Mom, he just tried to kick me out. In front of you. He didn't mean. Please do not tell me what he meant. Gary grabbed the deed again and held it up like the paper itself had personally insulted him. This is unbelievable. This is humiliating. I said, yeah, I imagine it is. Then he said the dumbest thing possible. Well, if I'd known this was some kind of arrangement where your daughter was the landlord, I never would have moved in. And I said, you can still fix that. That landed. He looked at me, then at my mom, then back at me. I watched the exact moment he realized I meant it. Not as a dramatic threat. Not as a tantrum, just as a logistical option available to all adults. He slept at his condo that night. Or I assume he did. He left in such a rush that he forgot his phone charger and a pair of golf shoes by the mudroom bench. My mom stayed up until almost 2 a.m. crying at the kitchen table. I sat across from her with a mug of tea gone cold because I was too angry to sleep and too tired to keep circling the same conversation. She kept saying, I didn't think it would go like that. I said, what exactly did you think would happen? She said she thought Gary would come around, and that she had been trying to find the right time to tell him about the house. She said she was scared he'd feel emasculated. She said she didn't want him to think she'd lied. I said, but you did lie. That was hard for her to hear, but it was true. Not a single dramatic lie, maybe. More death by omission, letting him assume things, letting him posture, letting him call it his home and make plans for my space and move my father's things because correcting him would be uncomfortable. At one point she said, I just wanted to have a marriage that felt normal. And honestly, that one got me. Because that was the root of it, I think. My mom did not marry Gary because he was especially kind or deep or emotionally safe. She married him because after widowhood and financial stress and years of fear, he offered her a version of normalcy she could step into like a display kitchen. Dinners out, weekend trips to Lake Geneva. A man who booked reservations and carried heavy things and told her she looked beautiful. He made her feel chosen and protected at a time when her life had felt shaky. And to preserve that feeling, she kept avoiding any truth that might crack the picture. Unfortunately for her, the truth was living upstairs with a laptop and access to county property records. The next morning Gary sent a text to both of us. It said, I think everyone needs space. I'll come by later for some things. Denise, call me when you can. Lauren, this conversation is not over. I replied, it actually is over as far as my housing situation goes. Let me know what time you're picking up your things. He did not like that. What followed was probably the pettiest week of my adult life. Though I still maintain he earned every second of it. Gary came back that evening while I was on a call. He banged around downstairs loud enough that my coworkers could hear drawers opening through my headphones. When I came down, he had several trash bags, 2 duffels, and an expression like he was loading evidence after a raid. He said, I'm getting some clothes and toiletries. I'm not moving out. I said, okay. He hated how little I gave him to work with. Then he said, I spoke to a friend of mine in real estate. He says there are marital rights here you're not considering. I said, great, have your friend explain them to an attorney. That was apparently the wrong answer, because he stepped closer and dropped the sales guy voice. You think because you've got some paper from the county clerk you can disrespect me? I said, no, Gary. I think because I legally own this house, you can't evict me from it. My mom came around the corner carrying a framed wedding photo like a hostage. Please stop. Gary pointed at me. This is exactly why nobody told me. Because she wanted leverage. That's when my Aunt Julie, of all people, decided to call my mom on speaker. I cannot overstate how little my family needed Aunt Julie in the middle of that moment. She is 62, divorced twice, treats boxed wine like a hydration strategy, and has all the delicacy of a police siren. Mom answered because she was frazzled. Julie said, loudly, so I hear Gary found out the house is Lauren's. Silence. Gary turned to my mom. Your sister knew? Mom closed her eyes. Julie, catching on too late that she was not helping, went, oh. Oh no, am I on speaker? I almost laughed. Gary's face did this fascinating sequence where betrayal, outrage, and embarrassment all took turns. How many people knew? I said, enough. He left shortly after that. Over the next few days, he tried several strategies. First was indignation. Long texts to my mom about deceit and respect and how a man should not be kept in the dark in his own household. She showed me some of them because at that point the illusion was dead anyway. They read like HR complaints written by somebody wearing too much cologne. Then came negotiation. He said he was willing to move past the misunderstanding if we all sat down and discussed household expectations moving forward. Translation. He still wanted authority, just now with paperwork knowledge. I said no. Then came image management. He called Brandon, who called my mom, who apparently had been told some version where I had sprung a legal technicality on Gary to humiliate him. Brandon texted me, kind of cold how you handled that. My dad didn't deserve to be blindsided. I wrote back, your dad tried to evict me from my own house. He left me on read. Then one of our neighbors, Nancy from across the street, asked my mom if everything was okay with Gary, because he'd been seen loading boxes into his truck and driving off twice in 1 week. Suburbs are a surveillance state run by women in Athleta. Within 48 hours, half the block knew something had happened. The part that still amazes me is that even then, Gary seemed to believe he could outweight me. Like if he stayed offended long enough, I'd get tired and apologize for owning the property too aggressively. He came by the following Saturday to talk. I made coffee because if there is one thing I've learned from Midwestern women, it's that sometimes serving coffee while ruining someone's position adds a beautiful layer of humiliation. We sat at the kitchen island. My mom kept twisting her wedding ring. Gary opened with, I think we all made mistakes. I said, okay. He nodded, like I had agreed with a deeper point. Then he said, I should not have spoken for Denise and me that way. But you also should have been upfront. The secrecy created a power imbalance. A power imbalance. He said it like he'd discovered feminism 5 minutes earlier. I said, Gary, the only reason the secrecy mattered is because you started making demands. He took a breath. I was trying to create structure in a house where boundaries were blurry. I honestly had to look away so I wouldn't laugh in his face. Boundaries were blurry? Yes. A married couple needs their own space. You moved into my mother's existing living situation. You knew I was here temporarily. He spread his hands. Temporary shouldn't mean indefinite. Good thing it doesn't. This was true, by the way. I had already started apartment hunting again once the Brandon conversation happened. Not because Gary deserved that information, but because I never intended to live there forever. I just wanted the choice to be mine, not his. He continued, Denise and I need to know what your long-term plan is. I said, my long-term plan is none of your business beyond what affects the property. That set him off. There it is, he snapped. The property. The paperwork. You talk about this like a transaction. I leaned forward, because when you try to throw someone out of a home, it becomes one. My mom started crying again. Gary rubbed his forehead like he was the weary adult in a room full of impossible women. Finally he said, what exactly do you want from me? And I said, very simply, an apology, and a clear understanding that you do not make decisions about this house. He stared at me so long I could hear the refrigerator running. Then he said, I'll apologize for the misunderstanding. I said, no. He blinked. No, not for the misunderstanding. For what you did. He never gave it. Not really. What he finally offered was, I'm sorry if you felt disrespected. The national anthem of terrible men. I said, that's not an apology. He looked at my mom like she should translate me into a more convenient language. She didn't. That was the beginning of the end of their marriage. Though it took a few more months to become obvious. Gary did move back in for a while, technically. My mom wanted to try to salvage things. I allowed it under one condition. He was not to touch my room, my dad's workshop area, or any storage related to the house without asking me directly. Also, no overnight guests beyond people explicitly invited by both my mom and me. Meaning Brandon and Kelsey were not moving in. He agreed because he had no leverage. But once somebody like Gary loses the ability to play king, they don't become humble. They become resentful. The house felt different after that. Not explosive, just poisoned. He stopped making open comments and switched to passive resistance. Cabinet doors left hanging open. Thermostat adjustments. Little digs to my mom when he thought I couldn't hear. Must be nice to live under your daughter's rules. Did you ask management before buying a new couch? Stuff like that. I spent even less time downstairs. I started going into the city more to see friends. I put applications in for a new apartment and quietly raised the idea with my mom that maybe, eventually, we should talk about whether she wanted to keep living there at all. That conversation was rough, because for all her conflict avoidance, my mom still loved the house too. Maybe not with the same feral possessiveness I did, but enough. Enough that the idea of leaving it felt like another loss layered on top of my dad. At the same time, I think the Gary situation forced her to confront something ugly. She had protected his ego more fiercely than she had protected my place in that home. Not because she didn't love me, because she was scared. Scared of abandonment, scared of conflict. Scared of being the difficult widow with complicated finances and adult family baggage. One night in late fall, after Gary had made some snide remark about landlord inspections, because I asked him not to leave. Wet leaves piled against the side gate. My mom came into my room and sat down the same way she had after the garage fight. She said, "I think I made a mistake marrying him." I just looked at her. Not because I disagreed, because it was the first honest sentence she'd spoken about him in months. She started talking then, really talking, about how he hated not feeling in charge. How every disagreement circled back to status and respect. How he brought up the house whenever he was angry. How he'd started saying things like, "No real marriage works when another adult holds the roof over your head." I said, "That's because he views everything as hierarchy." She nodded and cried and admitted she had known, deep down, that not telling him about the house was wrong. But once she delayed it once, it got harder. Then embarrassing. Then impossible. Then she was in a wedding dress in the backyard and the whole thing had become a trap of her own making. A few weeks after that, Gary moved out for good. There was no huge dramatic showdown, at least not from me. It was more pathetic than dramatic. He and my mom had some argument about money, then another about Brandon. Then one more about whether he should contribute to property taxes if he was just a tenant in his wife's daughter's house. Which, to be clear, nobody had asked him to do. He simply couldn't stop circling the humiliation. Eventually he announced he was taking space, again, loaded the F-150, and left. This time, my mom didn't ask him back. They're separated now. Maybe they'll divorce, maybe they won't. I don't know. I stopped trying to predict other people's tolerance for dysfunction a long time ago. As for me, I did move out. Not because Gary won. Because I was ready. About 3 months after the deed incident, I got a pretty nice apartment in Oak Park with tall windows, better coffee nearby, and enough distance that I could see my mom by choice instead of by hallway proximity. I kept the house, obviously. Mom still lives there. We did eventually sit down with an actual attorney and formalize a cleaner occupancy agreement so nobody could ever again pretend the situation was vague. She contributes a fixed amount monthly now, more out of pride than necessity. And we've gotten much better at talking directly instead of through guilt and guesses. The garage sign that said Dad's garage is gone. I threw it out the same week Gary left the second time. My dad's workbench is still there, with the pencil marks and the badly refinished top and one drawer that sticks in humid weather. Sometimes when I'm over, I stand there longer than I need to, pretending I'm looking for a screwdriver. The funniest part, if there is one, is that Gary still seems unable to tell the story in a way that doesn't make him look ridiculous. Through the suburban grapevine I've heard versions ranging from Lauren pulled a stunt with some trust paperwork, to Denise's family set him up, to there were legal complications with the deed. Which is such a dramatic way to describe, man tries to evict homeowner and learns to read. A few months ago I ran into Brandon at a Mariano's near the baby aisle. He looked exhausted in the way new fathers do, with mismatched socks and a cart full of wipes. We did awkward small talk for a minute. Then he said, kind of out of nowhere, "My dad really felt blindsided." And I said, "I know." He waited, probably for me to soften. Instead I added, "So did I." That ended that. I still replay that kitchen scene sometimes. Not because I regret it. Because it was one of those moments where a family stops pretending at the exact same second. All the roles fell apart. Gary wasn't the provider he imagined himself to be. My mom wasn't the peacemaker keeping everyone safe. I wasn't the temporary overgrown child in the upstairs bedroom. It turned out we were just three adults standing around an island under pendant lights. One of them holding a deed he should have known existed before he started issuing orders. And for anyone wondering, yes, I literally handed it to him. I didn't wave it around. I didn't make a speech. I didn't yell. I just slid the papers across the counter and let the county of Kane, the state of Illinois, and his own reading comprehension do the work. His face when he got to my name was worth every mortgage payment. Story number 4. My sister told everyone I was broke, until the bank manager walked over and greeted me by name. I'm 34 now, my sister Danielle is 38, and if you ask my family, she has always been dramatic, which is one of those phrases people use when they want to acknowledge a problem without ever actually dealing with it. The story happened last fall in Charlotte, North Carolina, where both of us still live. Although in very different worlds despite being 15 minutes apart on a map. Danielle lives in South Park in one of those giant new build houses that somehow already look staged for resale. White brick, black windows, circular driveway, beige everything inside. She's married to a guy named Brent who works in medical device sales. And they are the exact kind of couple who post anniversary tributes that read like sponsored content. She does Pilates at 10 a.m., drinks iced matcha she pretends to like, and has never met a mirror or a front-facing camera she didn't consider a professional obligation. I live in Plaza Midwood in a renovated duplex with creaky floors, a fenced backyard for my dog, and a porch that gets invaded by pollen every spring. I drive a 6-year-old Subaru, shop at Costco in leggings, and run a small bookkeeping and financial cleanup business for local contractors, dentists, and a couple boutique retail stores that are permanently one bad quarter away from panic. From the outside, Danielle definitely looks like the successful one. That matters because image is basically her religion. Growing up, she was the pretty sister and I was the smart, quiet one, which sounds harmless until you realize how those labels calcify in a family. Danielle got attention for entering a room. I got praise for report cards and being so easy. She was prom queen at our high school in Matthews. I was the kid helping our dad compare mortgage rates at the kitchen table because I thought Excel was fun. Our parents, for what it's worth, aren't bad people. My mom is a retired elementary school teacher and my dad owned a small HVAC company before selling it. They love both of us. But Danielle was always the squeaky wheel, and squeaky wheels get handled. If she wanted something, the whole household knew. If I wanted something, I usually found a way to manage it myself. That dynamic never really changed. Danielle married Brent at 27 after dating him for less than a year. Big wedding at the Ballantine Hotel, drone footage, peonies in giant glass vases, the whole thing. I was maid of honor, wore a mauve satin dress that made me look like a melting candle, and spent most of the reception fixing problems she created herself. 2 weeks after the wedding, she posted a caption about starting our empire together, and I remember showing it to my friend Rachel and saying, I think she believes marriage is a brand partnership. Meanwhile, my life took a less photogenic route. I got married at 29 to a guy named Evan, who was funny and restless and great until it came time to be dependable. We lasted 4 years. There was no cheating scandal, no screaming, no dramatic betrayal. Just the slow collapse that happens when one person thinks adulthood means commitment and the other thinks it means keeping options open forever. The divorce cost me more than it should have because I was stupidly generous. I didn't fight over the condo. I didn't fight over the retirement split hard enough. I just wanted out. I wanted peace. I signed things I should have had a lawyer review more aggressively. Told myself money wasn't everything. And moved into a rental with my dog and my filing cabinets and a weird numb feeling that lasted almost a year. Danielle loved that period of my life in the way some people love being near an open wound. She got to play concerned big sister while also enjoying the comparison. She'd come over with expensive candles and say things like, honestly, maybe this is your reset era, with the exact tone people use when they're glad your life has become a cautionary tale. What she didn't know, and what almost nobody knew, was that my business took off during that same period, not in an influencer, CEO babe way. In a boring, solid, deeply satisfying way. When Evan and I split, I was freelancing part-time doing back-office books for a friend's landscaping company and one pediatric dentist. Then the dentist referred me to another practice. The landscaper referred me to 2 contractors. Suddenly I became the person small business owners called when their QuickBooks was a disaster. Payroll taxes were behind, or they had no idea why they were making money on paper but still felt broke. Turns out there's a huge market for being calm, discreet, and good with ugly numbers. By 32, I formed an LLC. By 33, I had one part-time employee and enough recurring clients that I stopped taking random one-off cleanup jobs. I kept my own overhead low, maxed my retirement contributions, bought municipal bonds because I'm apparently 90 years old in spirit, and put almost everything else into savings and investments because after my divorce, financial security started feeling less like ambition and more like oxygen. I did not advertise any of this to my family. Partly because I'm private, mostly because Danielle interprets any good news from me as either a threat or a temporary misunderstanding that she can correct socially. To them, I was still the sister who'd had a rough few years. The one in the duplex. The one without kids. The one whose ex-husband had done better post-divorce because he posted photos from Napa with his new girlfriend, and I posted pictures of my dog in a Halloween bandana. And honestly, I let them think what they wanted. I dressed casually. I worked from home. I didn't care about status markers. My nicest handbag was a leather tote from Madewell. I bought furniture secondhand and refinished it myself. I do well financially, but if you passed me in Target, you'd assume I was there to return a lamp and maybe buy granola. Danielle cannot understand people who don't perform their money. She and Brent spend like they're being graded on it. They belong to a country club neither of them seems to enjoy. Their vacations are mostly photo shoots with room service. She upgrades phones like it's a spiritual cleansing ritual. If there is a way to take something ordinary and make it expensive, Danielle will find it. What I'm saying is, our values are not aligned. The broke thing started as a joke, then became a family script, then turned into something uglier. I first noticed it at my cousin Jenna's engagement party. Danielle introduced me to one of Brent's friends by saying, "This is my sister Olivia. She's in finance-ish stuff and currently embracing the minimalist post-divorce lifestyle." I laughed because the sentence was so ridiculous. Then she lowered her voice and added, "But not low enough. She's had some setbacks, so we're all just glad she landed on her feet." Setbacks. Like I was a regional mall. I said, "Danielle, I'm literally fine." She smiled and squeezed my arm like I was being brave in public. "I know, honey." That was her move, honey, when she wanted to put me half a step below adult status. After that, I started hearing versions of it more often. At Thanksgiving, she told our Aunt Melissa I was being smart and keeping things simple until the market improves. At Christmas, when my dad asked if I wanted another glass of Cabernet, Danielle laughed and said, "Don't pressure her into expensive tastes." When I passed on going to Aspen with a big group because I had quarter-end work, she told people, "Liv's being responsible right now, which honestly is for the best." One time, in front of my mother's bridge friends, she said, "Olivia and I have such different priorities. I'm more of a live now person, and she's in that rebuilding phase." I started pushing back gently. Then less gently. "Danielle, stop narrating my finances. Please don't describe me like a charity project. I'm not rebuilding. I'm just not stupid." That last one made her pout for half an hour. Which should have felt satisfying but mostly felt tiring. The thing is, if she had only done it to me, maybe I would have kept shrugging it off. But she started doing it to other people in ways that actually affected how they treated me. My mom began quietly slipping gift cards into my purse. Just because. My dad asked if I needed help with car insurance. My younger cousin texted me for advice about apartments and said, "You always seem so grounded even after what you went through financially." And I just stared at my phone wondering what exactly my sister had been telling people. So I asked my mom directly one Sunday after church. We were in her kitchen in Mint Hill. And she was slicing strawberries while pretending this conversation was happening to somebody else. I said, "What is Danielle saying about me?" Mom gave me that look moms give when they hope if they arrange their face correctly, the topic will self-destruct. She worries about you. That's not what I asked. She thinks you've had a hard time since the divorce. I had a hard time emotionally. That's not the same thing. Mom hesitated, then said, "She may have mentioned that you were renting and trying to be careful." I laughed. Trying to be careful? She makes it sound like I'm one utility bill away from living in my car. Mom sighed. You know how she is. I do know how she is. That's the problem. Then came the baby shower incident, which in hindsight should have warned me that Danielle was building towards something bigger. Our cousin Jenna got pregnant less than a year after her wedding. And the family baby shower was at this bright, aggressively cheerful event space in Waverly with balloon arches and custom sugar cookies shaped like rattles. Danielle showed up in a cream sweater set and knee-high boots like she was guest starring in a Hallmark movie about a woman who monetizes motherhood. There was a diaper raffle, a mimosa bar, and one of those gift registry printouts 3 pages long. I bought Jenna the expensive stroller attachment she actually needed because I love practical gifts and hate fake generous clutter. Danielle, meanwhile, gave her a personalized woven baby basket filled with neutral muslin things that definitely photographed better than they functioned. During presents, Jenna opened mine and started crying because she said it was the one thing she had been stressing about buying herself later. Everyone was sweet about it. Totally normal. Danielle leaned over to our aunt and said, loud enough for me to hear. Ah, Olivia really stretched for that. I looked at her. She sipped her mimosa and smiled. That was the first time I thought, she doesn't just assume I'm broke. She likes the story. A couple weeks later, my dad needed help entangling an issue with a wire transfer related to some investment account he'd opened after selling his business. He and my mom use Carolina First Community Bank in South Park. Not one of the giant national banks. More of a high-touch regional place where rich older people like being offered bottled water while discussing money. I know the bank because I also use it. A year earlier, I moved most of my personal and business accounts there after getting fed up with a big bank freezing a transfer during tax season. Carolina First has a treasury services team that actually answers the phone. And once my business crossed a certain cash reserve threshold, they started treating me like a real client. I met with one of their wealth advisors about short-term parking options for some retained earnings. It was all very unglamorous and spreadsheety and exactly my thing. My family didn't know any of that. Dad called me on a Thursday and said, "Can you come with us tomorrow to the bank? Your mother hears one word about routing numbers and her soul leaves her body." I said yes because helping my dad with paperwork is practically a childhood hobby. Then he said, "Danielle's coming too, since she's nearby." I almost cancelled on the spot. Not because I couldn't handle Danielle. Because I knew she'd somehow turn a bank errand into social theater. Still, I went. Friday morning I threw on dark jeans, white sneakers, a black knit top, and a camel coat because it was one of those weird Carolina fall days where it's cold in the shade and warm in the sun. I had my laptop bag because I had client work afterward. I drove over from my place with coffee and a travel mug and parked between a Range Rover and a Tesla. That probably cost more than my first condo down payment. My parents were already inside, sitting in the lobby area with Danielle and Brent. The bank itself looked exactly how expensive regional banks always look. Polished wood, stone counters, abstract art that says, "Trust us," and a faint smell of coffee and leather. There were private offices off to the side with frosted glass. And at the front desk a woman in a navy blazer greeted people like she knew their net worth on sight. Danielle gave me one slow once over the second I walked in. Not mean exactly. Appraising. She was wearing a cream-belted coat, heels too high for a financial institution, diamond studs. And that kind of glossy blowout that requires either a standing salon appointment or a pact with dark forces. Brent looked like Brent always looks. Quarter zip, nice watch, expensive haircut, face of a man born already networking. "Liv," Danielle said, air kissing near my cheek. "Casual Friday?" I said, "I work for a living." My dad snorted. My mom whispered, "Girls." Brent, who likes playing mediator when he's not the one being targeted, said, "We're just waiting on some manager or somebody." Danielle crossed her legs and said, "Dad got all mysterious about it. I told him these things are easier if you just let the professionals handle them." Dad ignored that. He asked me about the forms he'd brought, and I started looking through them. It was a pretty simple issue. He'd moved funds from one account to another institution, and the receiving side had kicked something back because of a name formatting mismatch. Annoying, not dramatic. While I was explaining that, Danielle leaned toward my mom and said, in the stage whisper voice people use when they very much want to be overheard, "I still don't know why Olivia needed to come for this. It's not like she has any banking complexity." I looked up. "Sorry, what?" She smiled with all her teeth. I'm saying Dad probably just wanted moral support. Mom immediately busied herself with her purse. Dad frowned, but before he said anything, Danielle kept going. Honestly, this is probably good exposure. These kinds of places can be intimidating if you're used to online banking and Venmo. Brent laughed into his coffee like a coward. I said, Danielle, what is your problem? My problem? She put a hand on her chest like the queen had been accused. Nothing. I'm trying to include you. By acting like I've never been inside a bank? She tilted her head. Well, have you had reason to be in this kind of bank? That was when I realized Brent and maybe even my parents were not hearing the same sentence I was. They were hearing teasing. I was hearing a woman who had spent years flattening me into a manageable story and had gotten so comfortable doing it that she no longer noticed where the joke ended. I should say here that I am not usually one of those people who stores up secret information, waiting for a public reveal. I'm not a humble them dramatically personality. My favorite revenge is distance. But I was also tired. Tired in the way you get when someone has been stepping on the same bruise for years and everyone around you calls it sibling banter. So instead of dropping it, I said, you really think I'm broke, don't you? My mom said, Olivia? Danielle shrugged, still smiling. I think you've been through a lot, and there's no shame in being in a different season. There it was, her favorite word, season, as if my entire adult life were a decorative pumpkin. I said, different from what? She spread her hands. From us. From where you thought you'd be. I'm not insulting you. Brent shifted uncomfortably. Dad muttered, enough. But Danielle was in performance mode now, and once she locks into that, it's like watching a Tesla accelerate. Smooth, silent, doomed. She leaned back and said, Liv, no one cares that you rent. No one cares that you budget. It's actually admirable. Not everyone needs to pretend. Pretend. That got my full attention. I said, very calmly, pretend what? She gave me this maddening look, all pity and sparkle. You know what, never mind. No, say it. My mom actually touched my arm and whispered, please don't. Danielle looked around the lobby. Saw that 2 older women and 1 man in a sport coat had definitely started listening. And somehow interpreted that as encouragement. She laughed lightly and said, okay. I think sometimes you act like you're doing better than you are, and it's unnecessary. We're family. It's fine if you need to keep things simple right now. There was a full second where nobody said anything. Dad looked embarrassed. Mom looked like she wanted to evaporate. Brent stared at the floor because rich suburban men are physically unable to interrupt the women in their lives unless sports are involved. I said, you've got to be kidding me. Danielle tilted her head. I'm being honest. The crazy part is, even then I still wasn't planning on saying much. I was just going to tell her privately later that if she ever talked about my finances again, I'd cut contact for a while. That was the plan. Then the bank manager walked over. His name is Michael Patterson. Mid-40s, silver at the temples, always looks like he just stepped out of a golf fundraiser. We'd met 3 times before, once for treasury services onboarding, once because a wire issue needed escalation, and once when he tried to convince me to move more of my liquidity into one of their higher yield relationship products. He came down the hallway from the offices, spotted me, and immediately changed direction. Ms. Carter, he said, smiling, hand out. Good to see you again. I stood up automatically and shook his hand. Hi, Michael. Danielle's face went blank for half a beat. He said, I was going to call you later anyway. We got confirmation on that transfer threshold adjustment for your business account. So you should be all set for next quarter. I said, perfect, thank you. Then, because God clearly wanted theater that day, he added. And I reviewed the notes from Lauren on the wealth side. Congratulations on the portfolio move. Smart timing. I could actually feel the air change. Not metaphorically, literally. It was like the room lost pressure. Danielle blinked. You know each other? Michael, who had no idea he was standing in a family minefield, said pleasantly. Of course. Olivia is one of our favorite clients. If there is a better sentence in the English language than one that accidentally detonates your sister's entire social narrative, I haven't heard it. Brent looked up so fast I thought he'd hurt his neck. Dad said, favorite client? I wanted to disappear and laugh at the same time. Michael, bless his oblivious professionalism, kept going. Absolutely. She's been wonderful to work with. Very organized. Then he glanced at the papers in my dad's hands and said, are you all here for the Whitaker transfer issue? I can have Denise at the front get you into a conference room. Danielle was still staring at me. Business account? I said, yes. Wealth side? Yes, Danielle. Banks contain many mysteries. Dad made a choking sound that was either a laugh or a cough. Michael, finally sensing an odd vibe, smiled and said, I'll send Sarah over. Then he nodded to me. Olivia, I'll email you this afternoon. After he walked away, nobody spoke for maybe 3 seconds, which in family time is an eternity. Then Danielle said, What was that? I picked up my coffee. A bank manager greeting me by name. Don't be cute. Then don't ask stupid questions. My mom hissed, Girls, not here. But honestly, not here, had sailed the moment Danielle decided to publicly do class commentary on my life in a bank lobby. She lowered her voice. Why would he say wealth side? I said, because I work with their wealth team. Brent said, for what? I looked at him. Money, Brent. Generally that's what wealth teams are for. Dad burst out laughing then. Full belly laugh. It startled all of us because my dad is usually pretty measured in public. He had tears in his eyes. He said, well, I guess that answers that. Danielle turned pink from the collar upward. You never said anything. I said, you never asked. You just announced things. She opened and closed her mouth once. I was trying to be supportive. No, you were trying to feel superior. Mom said my name sharply, but not because I was wrong. Danielle looked at Brent like she expected him to step in. He did what weak husbands of strong-willed women always do in public conflict. He adjusted his watch and became spiritually unavailable. Then Sarah, one of the bankers, came over and led us into a private conference room with bottled water and little bowls of wrapped mints, and we all had to sit there like adults while I helped my dad solve his transfer issue and my sister silently recalculated the past 3 years of family gossip. That meeting took maybe 20 minutes. Dad's problem was fixed in 10. The rest was small talk and signatures. Danielle contributed almost nothing. She kept sneaking glances at me like if she stared long enough I'd turn back into the version of me she preferred. When we got out to the parking lot, Brent said he had to head to a call and peeled off immediately. Which I respected if only for efficiency. My mom asked if anyone wanted lunch. Dad said no. Danielle said, Olivia, can I talk to you for a second? I almost said no, but I was curious which version of her I was about to get. The offended one, the tearful one, or the revisionist historian. We stood off to the side near the landscaping by the entrance, with my parents pretending not to listen from 10 feet away. Danielle folded her arms. Why did you let everyone think that? I actually laughed. I let everyone think what? That you were struggling. I never said I was. You never corrected it. Yes, I did. Repeatedly. She shook her head. Not clearly. The audacity of that nearly impressed me. Danielle, I told you more than once to stop talking about my finances. You made it sound like you were just being private. I was being private. That's different from broke. She lowered her voice. So what, you've just been sitting on money this whole time? This is what I mean when I say Danielle thinks money is performance. In her mind, unannounced money is suspicious money. If it doesn't change your car, your bag, your zip code, then what is even the point? I said, I've been building a business and handling my life. How much are we talking? I just stared at her. She actually got annoyed. Oh come on, don't act weird now. Now I'm acting weird? My mom approached then. Because the emotional sprinkler system in her body goes off at any sign of heat. Let's all calm down, she said. Danielle threw up her hands. I am calm. I'm just saying this is bizarre. Dad, who had wandered over more slowly, said, no, what's bizarre is you talking about your sister like she's a charity case. Danielle whipped around. I did not do that. You absolutely did, he said. For months. For months? She repeated, like she was offended by the time span more than the behavior. Dad sighed. Yes, Danielle. And we let it go too long because it was easier than arguing with you every time. That hit her harder than anything I'd said. Danielle has a high tolerance for conflict and a low tolerance for being seen accurately. She looked at my mom. You too? Mom did what she always does when forced to choose honesty or comfort. She chose the least direct possible version of honesty. I think maybe you made assumptions, she said softly. Danielle laughed once, sharp and humorless. Unbelievable. Then she turned to me and said, you enjoyed that in there. I said, no, I enjoyed not having to defend myself for once. She got into her SUV and left without saying goodbye. I wish I could tell you that was the end and everyone learned something and we all moved on. That is not how families like mine work. For the next 2 weeks, Danielle launched an image recovery campaign so transparent it would have been funny if it weren't so annoying. First she texted me, "I'm sorry if my joking about your situation came across wrong. Not an apology. A press release." I wrote back, "It didn't come across wrong. It was wrong." No response. Then she told my mom she had no idea my business was that serious, which is hilarious because what she meant was she had no idea I had enough money for a bank employee in a tailored suit to know my name. Then she started reframing the bank incident to relatives. My Aunt Melissa called me and said, "Danielle told us you've been doing really well and just keeping it quiet for tax reasons?" Tax reasons. Like I was laundering cartel money through a pottery studio. I said, "I've been doing well and keeping it quiet because it's none of anybody's business." Aunt Melissa laughed awkwardly and said, "Well, your sister was just so surprised." I said, "That's because she likes stories where she's on top." Silence. Apparently that got repeated, because 3 days later Danielle called me furious. "Did you tell Aunt Melissa I like stories where I'm on top?" I said, "Yes. That is such a nasty thing to say. Is it inaccurate?" She exhaled hard. "You have always thought the worst of me." "No, I've usually thought exactly what you showed me." She did not like that. What followed was the most honest fight we've ever had, and probably the only useful one. She came to my house unannounced on a Sunday afternoon while I was wearing old sweatpants and trying to transplant rosemary into a bigger pot. She arrived in designer sneakers and giant sunglasses, walked through my gate like she was entering a negotiation, and said, "We need to clear the air." I almost told her to leave, but again, curiosity got me. We sat on my back porch. My dog, Murphy, immediately decided she wasn't to be trusted and parked himself by my chair like a small furry bouncer. Danielle started with, "I think this whole thing has gotten blown out of proportion." I said, "By you, yes." She ignored that. "I was concerned after your divorce. You seemed closed off. You downsized. You never talked about money. Because I don't owe you quarterly reports. I'm your sister. That has not historically made you safer to tell things to." She recoiled like I'd slapped her. "Wow." I just looked at her. Then, in a tone I recognized from childhood, she said, "You always do this thing where you act morally superior because you're low maintenance." That actually interested me. "Explain." "You make me sound shallow because I care about nice things." "I make you sound shallow?" "Yes. You judge me constantly." I thought about that. There was some truth in it. I do judge her. It's hard not to judge someone who treats every family event like a casting call. But that wasn't really the point. I said, "Danielle, this isn't about taste. This is about you telling people I was broke." I never said broke. You heavily implied it to everyone with ears. I was filling in blanks because you're secretive. No, you were writing fan fiction about my life. She actually laughed at that, against her will. Then she caught herself. I kept going because once you finally stop cushioning the truth, it gains momentum. You liked being the sister who had it all together. The marriage, the house, the wardrobe, the club membership. And I was convenient as the cautionary tale. Divorced, renting, quiet. You got to be worried about me in a way that made you feel elevated. Her face changed then, less angry, more exposed. She said, "That is not fair." "It's extremely fair." She looked away toward my yard. "You have no idea what people expect from me." I almost rolled my eyes, but then she said, much more quietly, "Do you know how exhausting it is to always be the one everyone points to as the successful one?" That was not what I expected. I said, "Then stop performing for them." She laughed bitterly. "That's easy for you to say." And there it was, the core difference between us in one line. For Danielle, identity was external. Visibility was security. If people weren't actively confirming her status, she felt unstable. For me, the idea of needing that much feedback sounded like a disease. She started talking more, and for once it wasn't polished. Brent's income had been good, but inconsistent. They spent too much. The house was expensive. The club was expensive. Their oldest was starting private school. She said sometimes she felt like if she loosened her grip for 1 second, people would realize how much of their life was financed by timing and image and momentum. I said, "That sounds stressful." "It is." "Then why on earth were you trying to make me look poor?" She wiped under one eye, annoyed that she was crying. "Because you never seemed stressed." That landed harder than I expected. Not because it flattered me. Because it was sad. She had interpreted my privacy as emptiness, my lack of display as lack of substance, and my stability as something that somehow didn't count because it wasn't noisy. I said, "I was stressed. I was devastated, actually. I was just also handling my life." She laughed once through tears. I hate when you talk like that. Like what? Like you have some secret manual. I don't have a secret manual. I just don't post every feeling before I've had it. That made her smile despite herself. It was not a magical healing scene. We did not hug and become best friends. But it was the first conversation we'd had in years where she wasn't fully performing and I wasn't fully withdrawing. At the end of it, she said, "I am sorry." I waited. She took a breath and tried again. "I'm sorry I talked about you like that. It was mean." That was closer. I said, "Thank you." Then she ruined it slightly by adding, "I still think it's weird that a bank manager knows your business." I said, "That's because I have business." She rolled her eyes, and for the first time in weeks it felt almost normal. Things are better now, though not transformed. Danielle still can't help herself sometimes. At Easter she referred to my little empire of spreadsheets, which was honestly funny enough to let go. I still don't tell her much about my money. And now she's stopped asking because she knows I'll shut it down immediately. My parents are different with me too. Not in some gross opportunistic way, just more respectful. My dad asks for my advice openly now. Not as a favor but like he actually recognizes I know what I'm doing. My mom stopped trying to hand me random gift cards. She did, however, ask me quietly one evening how much she should keep in cash if the market gets weird, which is the closest she'll ever come to admitting she had the wrong picture of me. As for the bank itself, I still go there. Michael still says hello when I'm in. I moved one more account over earlier this year. And the wealth advisor sent me a handwritten note after year-end because apparently old school banking is alive if you keep enough zeros in boring places. I never told them what that accidental greeting detonated in my family. They probably think it was just a nice client touchpoint. But I will say this. There is something uniquely satisfying about being underestimated by someone who confuses quiet with failure. Especially when they've been narrating your supposed collapse for an audience. Danielle spent years telling everyone I was struggling, simplifying, rebuilding, keeping things modest, being careful, going through a season. All those soft little phrases people use when they want to sound compassionate while still ranking you beneath them. Then one man in a tailored suit walked across a polished bank lobby, smiled, shook my hand, and greeted me by name. I barely had to say a word after that. Story number 5. My parents left everything to my golden child brother. But Grandpa had changed his will years earlier. I need to get this off my chest because my phone has been blowing up for 2 weeks and I'm at the point where I either say it somewhere or I start answering family group texts with things that would probably get screenshotted forever. I'm 32, my brother Ryan is 36, and we grew up outside Noblesville, Indiana. In the kind of family where everybody swore they loved us equally while somehow one of us always got more. Ryan was the easy one to love out loud. He was good looking, loud, funny when he wanted to be. And the kind of guy who could forget to pick our mom up from the dealership and still somehow leave. The situation with her buying him lunch. I was the kid who remembered everybody's appointments, got good grades, did what I was asked, and got described with words like mature and independent, which I've learned usually means, we assume you'll cope without much from us. My parents, Stephen and Deborah, never would have called Ryan the favorite. But if you grew up in a house like mine, you know you don't need anyone to say it. You feel it in what gets forgiven, what gets funded, what gets celebrated, and what gets treated like no big deal. Ryan got a used Silverado for his 17th birthday because he needed it for work. I got a laptop for college and had to listen to a 6-month speech about how expensive it was. Ryan changed majors 3 times and dropped out for a year. And my mom told everyone he was finding his path. I switched apartments once after college because my first lease situation was a mess. And my dad asked me if I was ever going to settle into adulthood. Ryan married his high school girlfriend, Kayla, at 26. My parents paid for most of their wedding and later helped with the down payment on their house. Because a young family needs stability. I got engaged once in my late 20s, then it fell apart 6 months before the wedding. And my mother said maybe it was for the best because I always think too much. That was the rhythm of our family. Ryan did whatever Ryan wanted, and the rest of us adjusted the furniture around him. The main thing you need to know is that my grandfather, Walter, was the only person in my family who never played along with that. Grandpa Walt was my dad's father. He had a farm about 20 minutes from where we grew up, 78 acres of rolling ground. A white farmhouse that leaned slightly at the back porch, an old red barn, And one of those machine sheds that always smelled like oil, dust, and cut hay even in the dead of winter. It wasn't a huge operation by Indiana standards. He leased some of the fields to a neighbor after his knees started bothering him. But he kept enough going to feel useful. He had a huge vegetable garden, a pond full of stubborn bluegill, and a coffee mug in the kitchen that said "World's okayest farmer." When I was little, Ryan liked the farm if there was a dirt bike involved or if Grandpa let him drive the gator too fast. I liked it because Grandpa talked to me like I had a brain. He'd explain how property taxes worked while we shelled peas. He'd have me help him sort receipts at the kitchen table. When I was 13, he taught me how to balance his checkbook on paper because he thought people trusted computers too much. He was not a warm, gushy man. He was a World War II veteran's son who believed in black coffee, fixed fences, and showing up when you said you would. But if he liked you, you knew. He paid attention. He remembered what you said 3 months earlier. He didn't ask dumb questions. After my grandma Louise died, Grandpa got quieter. And a lot of our family started treating him like he was already halfway gone. Ryan would show up around Christmas and talk to him like he was auditioning for favorite grandson status, then disappear for months. My mom would ask how he was doing and then steer the conversation toward what's going to happen with the land eventually. My dad tried to be helpful. But even with him there was always this undertone that Grandpa's life had become an estate waiting to be sorted. I kept going out there because I wanted to. Sometimes after work I'd drive from Indianapolis with a gas station coffee, help him with the mail, bring groceries, or take him to cardiology appointments in Carmel. Sometimes I'd just sit at the kitchen table while he watched the local news and complained about the weather forecast being made by idiots. He started calling me kid, even after I was 30. The year everything really changed was 2017. That was when Ryan and Kayla started talking openly about building a custom house. Nothing insane by rich people standards, but insane by ours. They wanted a big 2-story place with a wraparound porch, quartz everywhere, and enough white shiplap to blind a person. Ryan was working for my dad's home renovation company at the time, making decent money when he actually showed up. And Kayla sold boutique real estate in a way that mostly involved Instagram stories and staged charcuterie boards. One Sunday after dinner at my parents' place, Ryan was half joking with my dad about how the farmland would set everybody up nicely one day. I still remember the exact tone because it made my skin crawl. My mother laughed and said, "Well, your grandpa isn't taking it with him." My dad said something about how families plan ahead. Everybody acted like it was a harmless conversation. Grandpa was in the den. The sliding door was cracked open. He heard every word. I know he heard because the next Thursday he called me and said, "Kid, drive me to a lawyer tomorrow." I asked if he was okay. He said, "I'm fine. I just want to get my business handled before your family starts measuring the curtains." So I took a day off and drove him to a small estate attorney's office in Fishers. The lawyer's name was Grayson Bell. Grandpa told me to wait in the lobby for most of it, but after about an hour Mr. Bell called me in to witness a couple signatures on healthcare documents and some other paperwork. I was careful not to read anything because it felt private. Grandpa signed a whole stack with the same annoyed expression he used when dealing with cable companies. On the way home, we stopped at a diner, and he looked at me over his coffee and said, "I fixed it." I asked what that meant. He said, "It means nobody gets to treat me like a raffle drawing anymore." That was it. He never explained more than that. I didn't push because that wasn't our relationship. If Grandpa wanted you to know something, he told you. If he didn't, you kept your curiosity to yourself and ate your pie. He died 2 years later. The funeral was exactly the kind of Midwestern funeral you'd expect. Military honors at the cemetery, casseroles in the church hall, neighbors telling stories about tractors and weather. Ryan cried hard at the graveside, which would have moved me more if he'd visited Grandpa more than twice in the previous year. After the funeral, my parents started referring to the farm in these weird possessive ways. My mom would say things like, "We need to decide what to do about the backfield," even though she had never once been the person deciding anything about that field. Ryan said, "I should probably get over there and look at the barn before winter." Like he had inherited Buckingham Palace. I remember asking my dad once whether Grandpa had left instructions for the place. He just said, "Everything's handled," in that clipped voice that meant I wasn't invited into the conversation. I let it go because I had my own life. I was working in operations for a healthcare company in Indianapolis. renting a townhouse in Broad Ripple, and trying to recover from a broken engagement that had left me feeling like the human version of a dented appliance. I was still driving up to see my parents, still helping more than Ryan did with practical stuff. But I had accepted that in my family being useful and being valued were not always the same thing. Then my dad died in 2024. It was a stroke, fast, ugly, and completely out of nowhere. One morning he was arguing with a supply vendor over lumber delivery times. And by that night he was in ICU with tubes everywhere and my mother clinging to me in a hospital hallway while Ryan kept saying, "This can't be happening," like repetition might reverse it. Dad had a will, but it was simple. Everything went to Mom, no surprise there. Ryan immediately shifted into protective son mode, which in his case mostly meant hovering around paperwork and telling people he'd help Mom handle things. I was the one actually ordering death certificates, sorting mail, canceling accounts, and sitting at the dining room table with my mother while she cried over insurance forms. Ryan did help in the way people like him help. He mowed the lawn twice and talked loudly about sacrifice. My mom never really recovered after my dad died. She got smaller somehow, even before she lost weight. She stopped cooking much, stopped going to church regularly, stopped pretending Ryan's family visited enough. I drove up almost every weekend. I cleaned out the pantry, took her to follow-up appointments, and spent hours listening to the same stories about my dad's habits because grief is repetitive and lonely and there isn't a shortcut through it. Ryan still got praised more. If he brought over takeout one night, Mom would tell 3 people. If I spent my whole Saturday sorting legal papers and balancing her accounts, it became invisible by Monday. She died last spring. Officially it was heart failure. But really I think some people just lose the shape of their life and don't know how to build another one. After the funeral, which felt like barely breathing through wet wool, Ryan started acting like logistics were a competition he had already won. He and Kayla were suddenly at the house every day. He was making lists. He was talking about paint colors for when we decide whether to keep or sell. He was telling people at the visitation that he'd take care of everything for Natalie. Like I was a cousin flying in from another state instead of his actual sister. I wish I could say I stood up to him then, but grief makes you tired and weird. I barely had the energy to pick out a blouse for the burial. Fighting over family politics felt impossible. Then came the estate meeting. If you've ever sat in a lawyer's office while the last scaffolding of your family gets translated into signatures and folders, you know how surreal it feels. Mr. Bell's office was the same one Grandpa had used years earlier. Same beige walls, same fake ficus in the corner. Same bowl of hard candy no one under 60 ever touches. It was me, Ryan, Kayla, and Mr. Bell. My Aunt Cheryl came too because apparently she'd appointed herself emotional support with opinions. Mom's will was straightforward, and also brutal in a way that somehow still managed not to surprise me. Her house, savings, life insurance, Dad's company proceeds that were left, the cars, and basically all material assets went to Ryan. She left me a small jewelry box that had belonged to Grandma Louise and a note saying she hoped I understood Ryan had greater family obligations. I actually felt my face go hot when Mr. Bell read that line. Greater family obligations. As if my worth could be measured by whether I had produced grandchildren. Ryan tried to do this fake humble thing where he sighed and said, "Mom just wanted to make sure the kids were secure." His kids, of course. Kayla squeezed his hand like they were on the cover of a magazine for people who weaponize family values. I asked if there was anything else. My voice sounded strangely calm even to me. Mr. Bell took off his glasses, looked down at a second folder, and said, "Yes. There is a separate matter involving your grandfather Walter's estate plan and a trust amendment executed in 2017. Ryan sat up immediately. Mr. Bell opened the folder and went on. Your grandfather amended both his will and the Walter M. Hensley Revocable Trust in August of 2017. The farmland, farmhouse, outbuildings, associated mineral rights, and brokerage account tied to the trust were not left outright to Stephen and Deborah. Instead, your parents were granted a lifetime right to the income from those assets and limited occupancy rights, with no authority to sell, transfer, mortgage, or redirect the principal." Ryan frowned. "What does that mean in English?" Mr. Bell looked directly at him and said, "It means your parents were allowed to benefit from the trust during their lifetimes. But they did not own those assets and could not leave them to anyone." I felt like the room tilted a little. Mr. Bell turned to me. Upon the death of the surviving life beneficiary, all trust assets passed to the named remainder beneficiary, Natalie Hensley. Nobody said anything for maybe 3 seconds. Then Ryan laughed once, short and disbelieving. That's not right. Mr. Bell slid copies across the desk. It is right. Kayla leaned forward so fast I thought she might knock over her chair. How much are we talking about? Honestly, that was the most Kayla response possible. Mr. Bell remained annoyingly professional. The farm has had a recent appraisal. The current value of the real property and structures is one part of it. There is also a brokerage account and certain cash reserves held in trust. Ryan looked at me like I had pulled a knife. You knew about this. I said, I knew Grandpa changed something. I did not know this. That was true. I knew he had fixed it. I did not know he had built an entire legal wall around the farm and quietly made me the person standing on the other side of it. Ryan pushed back from the table. This is insane. Mom and Dad would never have wanted that. Mr. Bell said, your grandfather's documents were clear, properly executed, and witnessed. Your parents were aware of the trust structure. That part hit me almost harder than the inheritance itself. They knew. My parents had known for years that the farm was never theirs to leave Ryan. And they still spent all that time acting like I was the extra child who should be grateful for scraps in a jewelry box. Ryan kept shaking his head. No, no way. Dad would have told me. Mr. Bell gave him a look that said he had spent 30 years watching families discover each other's worst qualities under fluorescent lighting. Your father was informed when the amendment took effect. Aunt Cheryl finally spoke. Walter always could be dramatic. I remember turning and looking at her because I wanted to ask how protecting his property from opportunists was dramatic, but I was honestly too stunned to form the sentence. Then Mr. Bell said there was a personal letter from Grandpa, not legally binding, but included with the trust file to be delivered to me when the remainder interest vested. My hands were actually shaking when I opened it. It was one page, written in Grandpa's blocky handwriting. He wrote that land should go to the person who loved it without waiting to profit from it. He wrote that he had watched for years who came by when there was nothing to gain, who listened more than they talked, and who treated old people like people instead of future transactions. He wrote that Ryan had his parents' full attention his whole life and did not need his too. Then he wrote one sentence that made my chest hurt so badly I had to look away for a second. He said, "Kid, I know what it is to be the one everybody assumes will manage without much. And I got tired of watching it happen to you." Ryan asked what the letter said. I folded it back up and said, "Nothing you'd like." That was not my most mature moment, but I stand by it. The meeting basically exploded after that. Ryan accused me of manipulating Grandpa. Kayla said it was convenient that I had been the one driving him to appointments. Aunt Cheryl muttered that this was going to tear the family apart, which felt rich considering no one had worried about family unity while I was being written out of my mother's estate like a minor bookkeeping error. Mr. Bell shut all of it down. He told Ryan that contesting the trust would be expensive and, based on the documentation, unlikely to succeed. Grandpa had medical competency records from the same month he signed everything. The trust had been properly funded years ago. The amendment had sat in place unchallenged through both my parents' lives. There was nothing sloppy about it. Ryan was so angry he started pacing the office. He kept saying, "Mom wanted the kids taken care of." I finally said, "She did take care of the kids. She took care of yours." That got me the kind of stare people save for betrayal, even though no one had considered my side betrayal worthy for years. By that evening, my phone was exploding. Kayla texted first, saying we should sit down as siblings and do what Mom would have wanted. Translation: sign over at least half. Then Aunt Cheryl called me crying about fairness. Then my cousin Luke, who has never once voluntarily involved himself in family issues unless there was a cooler of beer nearby, texted, "Hey, family first." Ryan's under a lot of pressure. I wanted to throw my phone in Geist Reservoir. What really got me was that nobody called to ask if I was okay. Nobody said, "Wow, your parents really hurt you." Nobody said, "Your grandpa must have seen something important in you." It was immediately about Ryan's expectations, Ryan's kids, Ryan's embarrassment, Ryan's plans. The next morning, Ryan showed up at the farm without asking me. I only knew because my neighbor from the townhouse, Hannah, was with me while I was trying to figure out trust paperwork over coffee, and I got a call from Mr. Bell's office saying Ryan had been seen on the property by the tenant farmer who leased the south field. Apparently Ryan had told him he was getting things in order. I drove out there so fast I spilled iced coffee all over my center console. Ryan was in the machine shed with 2 guys from a local auction company, pointing at Grandpa's old tractor and some equipment like he was already staging a sale. I remember standing in that doorway, breathing hard, looking at the same workbench where Grandpa used to sharpen mower blades, and feeling something in me lock into place. I said, "What are you doing?" Ryan turned around like I was the one interrupting him. "Seeing what this stuff is worth." "No, you're not." He gave the auction guys this awkward half smile and said, "Can you give us a minute?" One of them, a guy named Travis I vaguely recognized from FFA stuff years ago, looked at me and then at Ryan and seemed to realize he was standing in someone else's legal problem. They left fast. Ryan waited until they were out of earshot and said, "Don't be dramatic." I laughed because that had been my mother's word my whole life, and hearing it from him in Grandpa's shed was almost too on the nose. "You brought auction people onto property that is legally mine. It was Grandpa's. It should have stayed in the family. It is in the family. You know what I mean." I did know what he meant. He meant him. Then came the speech I think he had been rehearsing since the lawyer's office. He said he had 2 kids, real bills, and plans built around what Mom and Dad always intended. He said Grandpa had been old and bitter. He said I had swooped in when Grandpa was lonely and poisoned him against the rest of the family. That part actually made me step closer to him. Poisoned him? Ryan, he watched you ignore him for years. He heard Mom joke about selling his land before he was even dead. You did that all by yourself. His face changed at that because somewhere inside him, he knew it was true. Then he said the thing that ended any chance of me feeling guilty. He said, "You don't even need it. You've always been fine on your own." I just stared at him. There it was, the family gospel, straight from the source. The reason everybody had always felt comfortable giving me less, expecting more, and calling it normal. I said, "Exactly, I was fine on my own because I had to be." He didn't have anything to say to that. I told him to get off the property and not come back without permission. He laughed like I couldn't possibly mean it, so I called Mr. Bell from right there and put him on speaker. Mr. Bell explained, in the dry voice of a man who bills by the hour, that Ryan had no authority over trust assets and could be treated as trespassing if he interfered. Again, Ryan left after that, slamming his truck door so hard the whole frame shook. Since then, it's been non-stop pressure dressed up as concern. Kayla called me selfish. Aunt Cheryl said Grandpa played favorites too, which was rich coming from the woman who once gave Ryan $500 for home repairs and sent me a scented candle for my birthday. My mother's sister, Denise, who lives in Ohio and shows up to exactly one family event every 18 months, called to say I should think about what kind of aunt I want to be to Ryan's kids. Apparently the only acceptable kind is the one who finances their father's expectations. Even people I barely know have opinions now because small-town Indiana family gossip moves faster than weather. Someone told someone that I tricked Grandpa. Someone else said I had lawyered him into it, which is especially funny because I am not a lawyer and Grandpa would have set himself on fire before letting anybody push him around. The truth is less cinematic and a lot sadder. He saw what everyone else saw and decided to do the one thing nobody in my family expected. He made a choice that wasn't based on who made the most noise. The hard part is that this isn't even fully about the money for me. I mean, yes, the farm is valuable. Very valuable. The appraisal alone was enough to make me sit down. There's also a brokerage account Grandpa had built over years from land leases and conservative investing. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't change my life. It does. But the thing that has kept me up at night is that letter. That single sentence about being the one people assume will manage without much. I have read it at least 15 times. Because he was right. That's exactly what my place in the family was. The reliable one. The one who didn't need help. The one who would understand. The one who would take the smaller room, the smaller slice, the smaller acknowledgement. Because I was easier to disappoint. And then there was Grandpa, quietly watching the whole thing and deciding that no, actually, not this time. I went out to the farm by myself last Sunday. It was hot and still, one of those July afternoons where the air feels like it's holding its breath. I unlocked the farmhouse with the key Grandpa used to keep above the mudroom door frame. And everything inside smelled exactly the same. Old wood, coffee grounds, clean dust. That faint trace of machine oil that probably lived in his clothes permanently. His mug was still in the cabinet. The green plaid chair was still by the window. There was a seed catalog from 2023 folded on the end table like he might walk back in and complain about tomato prices. I stood in the kitchen and cried harder than I did at either estate meeting. Not because I suddenly felt rich. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen by somebody who was already gone. I don't know what my relationship with Ryan looks like after this. Right now it looks like silence unless it comes through a lawyer. He threatened to contest things. Then backed off after his own attorney apparently told him the same thing Mr. Bell told him. He still thinks our parents' intentions should matter more than Grandpa's documents. Which is convenient when their intentions favored him. Maybe in 10 years we'll talk about normal things again. Maybe we won't. What I do know is I'm not signing anything over. I'm not selling the farm just because Ryan built his life around money he never actually had. I'm not apologizing for something Grandpa chose with a clear mind and more honesty than anyone else in this family ever managed. My parents left everything they actually owned to my golden child brother. Grandpa made sure they couldn't take the rest with them. Story number 6. My son asked me to sell my house so he could buy his dream home. I'd already made other plans. I'm 63, a widow, and I've lived in the same 4-bedroom colonial in Dublin, Ohio for almost 29 years. It's the house where my kids grew up, where we hosted Thanksgiving every year. Where my husband Mark built the deck with his brother and swore the whole time because none of the boards were straight, and where I spent the last year of his life sleeping on the downstairs couch because he could no longer safely do the stairs. My son Jake is 37. My daughter Emily is 33. Jake is married to Lauren, and they have 2 kids, Sophie who's 8 and Mason who's 5. Emily is a pediatric nurse, divorced, and has a 6-year-old son named Owen. If I'm being honest, Jake has always been the one who expected life to bend a little for him. Not in a screaming, throwing things kind of way. More in a polished, confident, well obviously this makes sense, kind of way that can be harder to push back on. Mark used to say Jake was a natural salesman. I used to say Jake could talk a bird out of a tree. Usually with a nice smile and a hand on your shoulder. Mark died 4 years ago after a long, ugly stretch with Parkinson's. We had good insurance and still burned through money in ways I never could have imagined before we were actually living it. Special equipment, home health aides, a bathroom renovation, prescriptions insurance barely touched. All of it, we were comfortable, but it cured me of any fantasy that aging is cheap if you plan well. I planned plenty. Life still had its hand out. After he died, I stayed in the house longer than I expected because I couldn't deal with another big change, but by last fall I had finally started making real plans. The house is paid off. It's worth a lot more now than when we bought it in 1997. I met with a financial planner, then an estate attorney. And I decided I was going to sell in the spring. Buy a smaller 1-floor condo in Grandview near the shops and restaurants I actually like. Put a good chunk aside for my own future care. And travel a little while I'm still healthy enough to enjoy it. Nothing wild. Santa Fe, Charleston, maybe one fall trip to Vermont because I've always wanted to see it when the leaves turn. I hadn't made some big family announcement because, frankly, I didn't feel like turning my retirement into a committee discussion. Jake found out anyway, or at least found out enough. It started with brunch in February. Lauren texted me on a Thursday asking if I wanted to meet them at this place in Bridge Park that does overpriced avocado toast on wooden boards. That was already suspicious because Jake is not a casual brunch person unless he has a purpose. I got there and they were both unusually cheerful. Lauren had her laptop bag with her, which should have been my second clue. Jake hugged me, ordered my coffee before I sat down, and spent the first 10 minutes asking how I'd been sleeping, whether the furnace was still acting up, whether I'd given any more thought to downsizing. I remember looking up from my coffee and thinking, here we go. I said, I've thought about it, yes. Jake leaned back like we were finally entering phase 2 of a meeting. Okay, so don't freak out. We've been thinking about a family solution. I actually laughed because that wording sounded so corporate. A family solution to what? Lauren opened her laptop and turned it toward me. It was a listing for a huge house in Powell. White kitchen, black framed windows, giant island, mudroom with built-ins. The whole thing looked like it had been designed by Instagram and a sponsorship deal with Crate & Barrel. It was listed at $945,000. I said, that's nice, because I assumed I was looking at a fantasy home they liked. Jake smiled. It's more than nice. It's perfect. Great schools, cul-de-sac, finished basement, room for the kids, room for me to work from home. And there's even a first-floor guest suite. I said, congratulations? Lauren laughed a little too brightly. So the thought is, if you're already planning to sell, this could actually work for everyone. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Jake started talking fast, the way he does when he's already sold himself on something. He said the market was still competitive, interest rates were what they were. And the only way they could realistically get into something, truly long-term, was with a much bigger down payment. He said my house was just sitting there as equity. He said if I sold sooner rather than later, I could gift them enough to secure the Powell house. And then I could either stay with them for a while in the guest suite or buy a smaller condo later. Once the market settled. He said all of this like he was offering me an upgrade. I just stared at him. Lauren chimed in and said, it would be so nice for the kids to have you close, too. Like real built-in family life. Sophie's been saying she wishes grandma lived nearer. They live 23 minutes from me. I said, very carefully. So let me make sure I'm understanding you. You want me to sell my house so you can buy this house? Jake frowned, like I was making it sound crass on purpose. No, Mom, I want us to think strategically as a family. By using my house. By using your equity in a smart way. I laughed again, but not because it was funny. That is the same sentence in nicer clothes. Jake's expression changed immediately. He hates when his polished framing doesn't work. He said, you don't need a 4-bedroom house. I said, and you don't need a $945,000 house. Lauren looked down at her coffee. Jake let out this annoyed breath and said, see, this is why I didn't want to spring it on you. I just stared at him. You absolutely wanted to spring it on me. Then came the part that really got under my skin. He softened his voice and said, Mom, Dad would have wanted us to help each other. That line still makes my jaw tighten. Mark would have wanted me to be safe. Mark had watched me help him shower after a man who used to refinish basement drywall for fun couldn't button his own shirt. Mark knew exactly what old age can cost, financially and otherwise. Mark also knew our son had a tendency to confuse wanting with needing. I said, your father would have wanted me taken care of. Jake said, you would be. By living in your guest room? He gave me this irritated little shrug. Temporarily. I asked, how much were you planning to ask me for, exactly? Neither of them answered right away, which meant they had discussed a number. Then Lauren said, very softly, probably around $250. I almost thought I misheard her. $250,000? Jake jumped in. It's not like it disappears. It goes into the house. It stays in the family. Your house, I said. Our family asset. I said, no, it becomes your mortgage solution. We sat there in silence for a second. You could hear the espresso machine behind the counter and some poor girl at the next table trying to convince her friend to go to Scottsdale for a bachelorette party. Normal brunch noises while my son casually tried to redirect $250,000 out of my retirement. Jake tried one more angle. He said, look, Emily doesn't need help like this. Her life is simpler. This is an opportunity for the grandkids. That was where he really lost me. Emily has worked since she was 16. She put herself through half of nursing school on scholarships and weekend shifts. When her marriage fell apart, she moved into a 2-bedroom apartment and rebuilt her life without acting like the world owed her a soft landing. She is not flashy. She drives a Subaru with crushed Cheerios in the backseat and wears scrubs more often than normal clothes. She has never once looked at my house like it was a future transaction. I said, do not bring your sister into this. He leaned back and got quiet, which usually means he's angry enough to get cold. I'm just saying this would actually benefit the family. I said, no, it would benefit you. That brunch ended badly. Lauren started crying, not hard, just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Jake paid the bill like he was settling a business lunch that had gone south. He hugged me in the parking garage and said, I think you're reacting emotionally. I said, I think you're budgeting with my obituary. He got mad at that. Told me that was unfair and dramatic. I drove home shaking. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it was more like the opening pitch. Over the next 3 weeks, Jake kept sending me listings. Not even subtly. He'd text, another great option if Powell doesn't pan out. Or, this one has a first-floor suite that would be ideal for you. Lauren started sending me screenshots of design ideas for multi-generational spaces. which I had previously only seen on HGTV and assumed nobody in real life used that phrase with a straight face. One Saturday she sent me a photo of a finished basement with a little kitchenette and wrote, "Imagine movie nights with the kids." I wrote back, "I can already have movie nights with the kids." She hearted the message and then didn't respond. Jake called me after work a few days later and acted like he was trying to reason with me. He said he wasn't asking me to hand over my life savings, that I would still have plenty, and that I was being stubborn because I'm emotionally attached to the house. He said people do this all the time now, using home equity to help the next generation get ahead. I said, people with extra money do. I don't have extra money. I have retirement money. He said, Mom, you are not poor. I said, that has never been the standard for whether I should hand my adult son $250,000. He went quiet for a second, then said, "You know what I think? I think you got this idea in your head about the condo and now you can't see past it." What he meant was, you had plans before I inserted mine, and that annoys me. The truth is, I did already have plans. I had put down a refundable deposit on a one-floor condo unit that was being renovated in Grandview. Nothing enormous, but nice. Walkable. 2 bedrooms, a little balcony. Underground parking so I wouldn't be scraping ice off a windshield at 70. I had also already met with my attorney and drawn up a living trust. The plan was simple. Sell the house, buy the condo outright, invest the rest conservatively, and keep enough liquid so I would never have to ask my children if I could afford my own life. After I die, whatever remains gets split evenly between Jake and Emily, with specific college funds carved out equally for all 3 grandkids. Not glamorous, just responsible. I hadn't told either kid the full details yet, mostly because it was my business, and partly because once money becomes visible in a family, people start counting it before it exists. Emily found out about the drama because Jake called her and tried to recruit her, which was an especially dumb move. She called me that night from the hospital parking garage while eating stale pretzels for dinner. That's how half our phone calls happen. She said, "Did Jake really ask you to sell your house so he can buy a McMansion?" I said, he would be deeply offended by the word McMansion. She laughed so hard I could hear her snort. Then she got serious and said, "Mom, tell him no and stop explaining. Every time you explain, he thinks there's room to negotiate." I said, "I did tell him no. You told him no like a nice person. You need to tell him no like the owner of the money." That line stuck with me. A week later, Jake invited me to just come look at a house in Powell because it might make more sense once you see the layout. I should have said no. I know that. But there is something about being a mother, even to a grown son, that makes you keep walking back into situations you already know are going to insult you. So I went. It was a Sunday open house. The place was huge. 2-story entryway, giant light fixture, fresh baked cookie smell from some diffuser machine realtors used to make you think laminate. Flooring equals love. Lauren was already there in a cream sweater holding a paper cup of cider like she belonged in a listing video. Jake met me at the door with that overbright energy again. Then I saw he had also brought their realtor. I nearly turned around right then. The realtor, a woman probably in her 40s named Denise, shook my hand and said, "Jake and Lauren have told me so much about you." I said, "I'm sure they have." She started walking us through the house like I was part of the buying team. This suite here would be ideal if you wanted to stay with them initially. And then later the space could transition as needs change. Families are being so creative now. I said, "I'm not staying here initially or later." Denise did that tight professional smile people do when they realize there's a crack in the pitch. Jake jumped in and said, "Mom, just hear it out." Then, "And I still can't believe he did this," he said. "We're talking through some family financing options." In front of the realtor. I have no idea what my face looked like. But Denise suddenly became fascinated by a set of French doors and drifted away. I turned to Jake and said, quietly, "You brought me here to discuss my money with your realtor?" He said, "Why are you making this weird?" Lauren stepped in with this calming voice she uses when she thinks I'm the emotional one. "Nobody's trying to pressure you. We just want you to see the bigger picture." I said, "The bigger picture appears to be that you've already spent my money in your heads." Jake's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." I said, "What's not fair is ambushing me in an open house with a stranger and calling my retirement a family financing option." Then I walked out. He followed me all the way to the driveway. We stood there between 2 SUVs while kids ran across the lawn and a couple in matching puffer Vests discussed countertops 20 feet away. Jake said, through his teeth, "You are embarrassing me." I said, "Good." He stared at me like I had slapped him. Then he said something that made everything click into place. He said, "We already put in an offer on this place, okay?" I just looked at him. He ran both hands over his face and said, "It's contingent on us securing the down payment." But the sellers liked our offer. We had to move fast. I said, "You put in an offer on a $900,000 house before I agreed to give you money?" He snapped, "Because we thought you'd at least be willing to have a rational conversation." That was the first honest sentence out of him. He had already built a plan that required my cooperation. And now he was mad that I hadn't read my assigned lines. I said, "So this isn't really about me downsizing. It's about the fact that you made promises before you had the cash." Lauren had come outside by then and she said, "We didn't make promises. We made a competitive offer." I laughed, short and sharp. With my house. I left. That night Jake texted me a long paragraph about how disappointed he was that I chose to interpret everything in the worst possible light. He said Lauren was humiliated. That I had no idea how hard it is for families with young children right now. And that my refusal to even consider helping them was honestly hurtful. I wrote back, "I considered it. The answer is no." He didn't respond. Things got ugly after that in a very modern family way, which is to say, not usually face to face. It was a lot of group chat tension, delayed replies, carefully worded texts, and social media posts that weren't technically about me but were definitely about me. Lauren put an Instagram story up one evening that said, "Wild how some people preach family values until helping family costs them something." White text on a beige background like it was wisdom from a candle company. Emily sent me a screenshot and wrote, "She is exhausting." I probably should have ignored it, but instead I muted Lauren for a month. Then Jake skipped Sunday dinner at my house twice in a row, which is very unlike him. The third week he showed up alone, late, already irritated. Emily and Owen were there. Sophie and Mason were at Lauren's parents' house. I had made pot roast because it was raining and I still cook like it's 1998 when I'm stressed. We made it through maybe 12 minutes of normal conversation before Jake said, "So are we going to talk about this or are we all just pretending?" Emily put her fork down immediately. She has excellent instincts for incoming nonsense. I said, "There is nothing to talk about." I said no. Jake looked at Emily and said, "Of course you'd be fine with that." Emily actually blinked at him. "What does that mean?" He shrugged. "It means your housing needs are not exactly the same." She said, "My housing needs?" I jumped in. "Jake." But he was already going. "You have one kid and an apartment. We're trying to build something stable." Emily leaned back in her chair and said, "You mean you're trying to buy a giant house you can't afford unless mom bankrolls it?" He pointed at her like she'd proven his point. "There it is. That attitude." She laughed. "What attitude? Math?" I should probably say here that Emily is not warm in conflict. She is calm in a way that makes other people look ridiculous. Jake hates that. He turned back to me and said, "Do you know what the worst part of this is? It's not even the money. It's that you'd rather sit on a house that's too big for you than help your own grandkids." I said, "My grandkids have food, clothing, school supplies, soccer cleats, birthday parties, grandparents, and two healthy parents who both work. Do not talk about them like they're standing in a breadline because you want quartz countertops." That's when he said it. Well, maybe Dad was right about leaving the house to me. The room went completely still. Mark had never said that. Not once. And even if he had, which he didn't, Jake knew exactly what a dirty move it was to invoke a dead parent in the middle of a money fight. I said, very evenly, "Your father never said that." Jake looked away, which told me everything. Emily stood up and took Owen to wash his hands because she is smart enough to remove children before adults say things that sit in them for years. I looked at my son across my own dining room table and saw, for the first time very clearly, that he did not think he was asking me for help. He thought he was collecting something delayed. And something in me just settled. I said, "Okay, since you insist on talking about this, here are the facts." He crossed his arms. I said, "I have already made plans for this house. Real plans, not vague ideas. I've met with a financial planner. I've met with an attorney. I've put down a deposit on a condo. The money from this house is going toward my retirement, my future care, and my independence. After I'm gone, whatever is left will be divided equally between you and your sister, with equal college funds for all 3 grandkids." He stared at me like I'd switched languages mid-sentence. I kept going. I am not selling my house to give you a down payment. I am not moving into your guest room. I am not reorganizing the last third of my life around a house you picked out before you had financing. Jake said, "You already did all that without telling me?" I almost laughed at the word telling. "Yes," I said, "because it is my life." He stood up so fast his chair scraped hard across the wood floor. Unbelievable. Emily came back in just in time to hear that. She looked between us and said, "What's unbelievable is that Mom had to explain she's allowed to use her own money on herself." Jake ignored her. He looked at me and said, "So that's it? You're choosing a condo over your family?" And I said the truest thing I'd thought in weeks. "No, I'm choosing not to become financially dependent on the same people currently pressuring me to hand over my security." He actually recoiled, like I had insulted him. Then he said, "Wow." Which, in my experience, is what people say when they don't have a better line. He left without dessert. Which sounds funny, but in my family, leaving without pie is basically a declaration of war. After that, things went cold. Not silent, exactly, but cold. He still brought the kids by for Easter. But Lauren barely looked at me and Jake behaved like he was doing community service. Sophie, who is 8 and says everything she thinks, asked me if I was still getting the basement bedroom at our new house. Lauren looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. I bent down and told Sophie, "No, sweetheart. Grandma's getting her own new place." Sophie said, "Oh, Daddy said you were moving in with us because old houses are hard for old people." That one stung more than I want to admit. Jake snapped, "Sophie, go help Mason with his basket." But the damage was already done. It told me this whole fantasy had been discussed in front of the kids as if my consent was a formality. A few days later Lauren called me for the first time in weeks. She sounded shaky and tired instead of performative, which honestly made me soften for a second. She said, "I know things have gotten really bad." I said, "Yes." She said, "I just want you to know Jake is under a lot of pressure." I almost said, "Aren't we all?" but let her continue. She said they'd lost the Powell house, and then another one. And that they'd gotten ahead of themselves because they were trying to get into a better school district before Sophie started 3rd grade. She said her parents had helped them as much as they could, but not enough to close the gap. Then she said, "He really thought you'd want to help." There was a long pause. Then I said, "Wanting to help and being willing to harm my own future are not the same thing." She got quiet. Then, to her credit, she said, "I know." It was the first reasonable thing I'd heard from that side in months. I told her I loved them, I loved the kids. And I hoped at some point Jake would understand that my saying no to this was not a personal attack. She said she hoped so too. But I could tell from her tone that she still thought I had money I simply didn't want to share, rather than money already assigned to necessary parts of a very normal aging life. A lot of people in their 30s really do not understand what it costs to be old in America until they're the ones sitting with a parent while someone explains memory care pricing in a private office with fake plants. I listed the house in May. That was harder emotionally than the fight with Jake, if I'm honest. The house had held my whole adult life. The pencil marks in the laundry room where we measured the kids. The small burn mark on the patio table from the summer Jake tried to grill before he knew what he was doing. The wallpaper in the downstairs powder room that Emily always hated. Mark's workbench in the garage with screws still sorted into old peanut butter jars. I cried the day the stager removed half my family photos and said, kindly, "We want buyers to imagine themselves here." What she really meant was, "We need your life to look less lived in so someone else can picture theirs." Emily came over every weekend to help me sort things. She never once asked what she was getting or whether I was being fair. Mostly she asked whether I wanted to keep something, donate it, or throw it away. She brought iced coffee and masking tape and didn't make me feel old. Jake didn't come. He did, however, call me the day after I accepted an offer. He said, "So it's done." I said, "The house is under contract, yes." He was quiet for a second, then asked, "How much did it go for?" I said, "Enough." That irritated him immediately. "Why are you being like this?" I said, "Because I'm no longer discussing the sale of my home as if you were a stakeholder." He said, "I'm your son." I know that. That should mean something. It does, I said. It means I love you. It does not mean you get a vote. He said, and this was the saddest part because he sounded more wounded than angry, "I just thought family took care of each other." And I said, "I am taking care of my family. I'm making sure I can pay for my own life and never become an emergency for either of my children." He didn't answer. I moved into my condo in late June. It's smaller, yes, but beautiful in a quiet way. Big windows. A balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs and a potted tomato plant I'll probably forget to water. There's a coffee shop downstairs and a bookstore 3 blocks away. I can walk to dinner with friends. I can lock the door and leave for a weekend without wondering if the gutters are overflowing or the sump pump is acting up. For the first time since Mark got sick, my life feels manageable. Jake eventually came by to see it. Not the first week, not the second. It was about a month later, on a Sunday afternoon. After Emily had already helped me unpack the kitchen and hang the framed print of Lake Michigan. That used to be in our old den. He stood in the doorway holding a bottle of wine like we were both supposed to pretend none of the last 6 months had happened. He said, "Nice place." I said, "Thank you." He walked through the condo slowly, hands in his pockets, looking at the balcony, the kitchen, the guest room. Then he said, "It suits you." There was so much loaded into that sentence I almost laughed. We sat down and had coffee. Real conversation, finally. Not perfect, not clean, but real. He admitted he and Lauren had gotten caught up. That every listing felt like the last chance to give their kids what everyone else seemed to have. Bigger yards, better schools, finished basements, neighborhood pools, all of it. He said social media made it feel like if you weren't moving forward fast enough, you were failing publicly. He said some of his friends had gotten family help. And he started thinking maybe that was just what happens now. I told him I understood envy. I understood panic. I even understood wanting a different life for your kids than the one you had. But I told him there's a difference between hoping your parents help and feeling entitled to rearrange their future to subsidize your own. He looked down at his coffee and said, "I know." I said, "No, I don't think you did. I think you're starting to." We were quiet for a while after that. Then he asked, very quietly, "Did you really think I'd let anything happen to you?" That question hit me harder than I expected because I do believe he loves me. I believe that completely. But love and maturity are not the same thing. And love does not magically turn an adult child into a retirement plan. So I said, "I think you believed that. I also think you believed I should take that risk because it helped you." He didn't argue. He cried a little, which he hates. I didn't make a big thing of it. I just handed him a napkin and let him keep his pride where he could. Things are better now, but not magically repaired. He and Lauren ended up buying a smaller house farther north than they wanted. And not in the school district they were aiming for. It's nice, just not dream home nice. They still mention how crazy the market is, and I nod, because it is. Sophie and Mason like my condo because there's an elevator and a gelato place nearby. Emily says my new living room actually looks like me instead of a museum of our childhood, which is rude but not entirely wrong. The weirdest part is that I think Jake genuinely thought this was a normal ask. Aggressive maybe, but not outrageous. That bothers me more than if he'd come to me ashamed and desperate. There's something chilling about being looked at by your own child and realizing he sees your home, your history, and your safety net as an available lever in his life. I still love him. I still have them over. I still buy Sophie craft kits and Mason those little dinosaur shirts he likes. But something shifted for me at that brunch table and never shifted all the way back. Maybe that's what happens when your kid stops seeing you as a person with a future and starts seeing you as a bridge to his own.